Hello, everyone. Welcome. I think I can now jump past this to get into my own material. But first, I want to start with just a little bit of a story of why we're all here. To some degree, that's probably clear from the title. I want to talk about product thinking for platform teams, applying product management ideas. But this actually started as a brief talk that I gave at AWS reInvent last November, December timeframe. And as I was putting that together, I had a few thoughts, which I'm going to share with you. Again, it was very brief. We'll use that as a bit of an introduction to set the stage. But interestingly, I think out of the guests that we have today, Camille's book, I think, was just out, and I referenced it, telling people they should probably read it, even though I hadn't had a chance to read it yet. I had just finished Teresa's book. And so when we started talking about doing this at a slightly larger level, those were a couple of the people that I went to find immediately. And then I'll introduce the other folks as well and some of my background with them, which I'm also super excited about. So I'm going to walk you through, again, some introductory ideas to kind of set the tone for this. And then at the end of this section, before we head into the first fireside chat, I'll tell you a little bit more about each of the guests, what we're going to cover in each of those sections, just so you have an understanding of how this is structured and can get a sense of where we're going to focus throughout this whole session today. So, and thanks to all of you. Thanks for joining. I'm really excited to be here. And this is a topic that's very near and dear to me. At CircleCI, we have a platform team, and I'm actually responsible for that team. And we also sell our product to a lot of platform teams. A lot of what platform teams are doing involves what we provide to them. So we think about this problem from a couple different perspectives. So let me jump right in. So at a high level, there's three things that I want to think or talk about, and I want you to think about with respect to incorporating product thinking into platform teams. And the first thing that we need to talk about is what does product thinking mean? What does it mean to think about what you're building through a product lens? And how can we sort of reshape the conversation of what a lot of platform teams are doing in that framing, in the framing of product? The second is creating winning conditions, meaning how do you get the right organizational structure, whether that's something you have responsibility for or something that you need help with, to ensure that platform teams can be successful, and in particular can be successful driving from a product orientation. Finally, building partnerships. So really building trust and relationships with your customers, which we're going to talk about a lot. And the customer typically of a platform team inside an engineering organization is what we would call a product team. So engineers that are building the end product of the company, the thing that goes to your end users, and platform teams are typically supporting or enabling those teams to achieve that more effectively, more reliably, more securely, more quickly, whatever that might be. But that customer for the platform team is the product team, and how to orient around that and really build trust and a great relationship with them. So let's jump into building great product. So at a super high level, what does that mean? And there's three perspectives that I want to share that I think about a lot. As I spent a lot of time, honestly, as a CTO, I spent a lot of time reading about product management, thinking about product management. We happen to sell a product to a very technical buyer, so it's a little closer than in some organizations. But I really believe technical leaders who have a really good understanding of how product functions will be more effective technical leaders. So a few quotes from a few of my favorite writers, speakers, thinkers on the topic. Number one from Melissa Perry, who wrote Escaping the Build Trap. I quote books all the time. I always recommend that folks read them. So the build trap is when organizations become stuck measuring their success by outputs rather than outcomes. And so really that means when what you're measuring is that you built a thing rather than that thing effectively solved a problem. And this is a problem. It's one of the problems that honestly led me down this whole path with respect to platform teams, is we've ended up in a state where a lot of platform organizations, at least in their early days, and some still, set out to try to solve a problem, but didn't necessarily understand it, and therefore ended up building a lot of tools and assuming that product teams would appreciate those tools, would adopt those tools, and would somehow become more successful, but hadn't spent the time really understanding what the problem was of those product teams and how to solve that problem for them. So you end up spinning your wheels, basically building technology, but not really solving the problems. And then you get, honestly, like a backlash in your organization quite typically, which is, hey, we're spending all this money. What are we getting for it? What's the outcome that we're driving towards? And so a lot of folks in product think about splitting the overall concept of product management, of construction, and from an R&D perspective, into discovery and delivery. Discovery being identifying what it is that needs to be built, and delivery being actually building and delivering that thing to market. Marty Kagan has written a bunch of books on the topic. Inspired was the first of those, and describes this as dual track agile. Within that really is describing these things. Yes, they are two separate phases of what you're building, but they happen in parallel. And you do a lot more discovery than you do delivery, meaning you should evaluate a bunch of different concepts, a bunch of different possible opportunities or problems to solve, and then only focus on the ones where your discovery leads you to believe that it's possible, it's technically achievable, and it will have sound like reasonable impact, and the customer wants it, right? We can dream up all kinds of ideas, but the cheapest way to evaluate them is going to be through this discovery process, not through building everything and then seeing what happens. And then finally, again, I was talking about Teresa, and she'll be joining us later, so I'm super excited about that. I had just read this book before I first put this together. And one of the things that Teresa is very focused on is customer touch points. So really interacting with your customer. And in particular for platform teams, this is super interesting because your customer is quote unquote in the building, meaning you have very direct access to your customers. A lot of the challenges of many product teams is getting real feedback from customers, getting people engaged, interested to speak to them, willing to give them open and honest feedback about what's happening, and what would work for them, what their problems might be, et cetera. This tends to be a lot easier when your customer is another employee of your own organization. So when you're building a platform and thinking about that product engineering team as your customer, you might even know them. You don't even have to go discover who they might be. You can literally jump in Slack. I'd say pick up the phone. Nobody really does that. Get on a Zoom, have a real conversation with them without a huge amount of effort. Now, you should still structure those conversations in a way that really relates to getting good, useful feedback and information. But getting to those folks is pretty straightforward. You might even be a customer in some way. Like you're building a product for engineers. Typically, you might have worked in the product side of your organization. So there's a lot of opportunity to get that real, honest feedback and to get it consistently to make sure that you're building towards the desired outcome. So that's thinking about product, and we're going to dive a lot more into that through this whole day. I'm really excited about that. Next, let's talk a little bit about winning conditions. And what I mean by that is creating the environment in which platform teams can be successful. So you're thinking about the customer, you're oriented towards the customer. How do you create the environment throughout the organization? And that may be on a platform leader or a member of the platform engineering team. It might be on other members of leadership to ensure that there's sufficient support. I think one of the things that is always a struggle for platform teams is how you get going. Typically, they come along a little later in the evolution of an organization. And as a result, it might feel like you're taking things away from teams. It might feel like teams are losing their autonomy to operate in particular ways. It might feel like you're competing. And so how do you balance that inside of an organization? And the first thing that I commonly run up against and think about a lot is that you actually don't want mandates. I forget the reference, but I think it was the CEO of Snowflake who said, if you want to see what happens when people don't have sort of a push, kind of visit the DMV. Now, I've actually been to the California DMV a bunch lately, where I live in California. It's Department of Motor Vehicles for anyone who doesn't live in the United States, maybe, or a place that has a Department of Motor Vehicles. And actually, it's gotten a lot better. But nevertheless, the sort of notion of there's nothing driving me to do the thing that I need to do, therefore I can take all the time in the world, therefore I can focus on doing the thing that I want, is something that happens or can happen when there are mandates. Because if there's a mandate to adopt the thing that you're building as a platform team, then you're not pushed to really focus on the needs of the customers, of your customers, right? So you want to ensure that you're sort of like, you need support for sure, but you want to be motivated, fighting to get adoption of your platform. You want to be really focused on the customer problem, because when you're solving customer problems, the adoption will come, That's for certain. And so you don't want to be in a scenario where you're simply, everyone has to use this regardless of what we do. It's a thing that I've seen go wrong more than once. And so one way to think about this is it's competition, right? And you are, again, it's a strange customer dynamic that you have as a platform team, because your customer is kind of capable of doing the thing that you're doing for them, right? Often platform teams come along because there's some repetition or work that's getting done multiple times in different ways across the organization. So there's a goal to sort of streamline that and bring it together. But by definition, therefore, there are alternatives that people can choose. And if there are alternatives, then you're in a competitive scenario, and competition makes you better. For anyone who's not familiar with this reference, it's from Arthur Ashe Stadium, where the US Open is played in tennis. And this quote from Billie Jean King hangs in front of the entrance as you're walking on as a player, saying, "Pressure is a privilege." Like, to be on the stage, to have the opportunity to compete, is something that you've earned, and you should embrace that and use that to drive you and motivate you to really solve challenges for your customers and really create success for your business. And so when you wake up thinking that every day, I think you're in a much better place. Now, the one place that I do think you want your leaders, head of, maybe it's the head of engineering overall, maybe it's the CEO of your company, I'm not sure, but at a reasonably high level, what you do need within the organization, and you want that support with, is shared goals. And one of the most common references that people use in terms of platforms and shared capabilities is this notion of a paved road. And it's a lovely idea. You can travel down the paved road, and traveling down the paved road is going to be faster and easier, more reliable than, getting off the road and traveling through the bush, let's say. But if you as a platform team believe that your goal, this is Mount Shasta coming down I-5 in California, if your goal is to get down the highway as quickly as possible, but your product team's goal is to go for a nice backcountry ski, they may not find your paved road very appealing. And so you need the accountability, the drive, the desire within the organization to deliver value to customers as quickly as possible. And what you want, what I often describe I want, is a scenario where those product teams are saying, boy, I wish we really had this from the platform team, because that would make it easier for us. We're trying to achieve this goal, which is great for the company, and we'd be able to achieve that more readily if we could get these things out of our platform organization. And when instead they're saying, it would be really fun to go build this thing, oh, we'd like to build our own platform because we think we could learn something from that, those things make it very difficult for you to succeed as a platform organization. And they're generally not in the best interest of the company as a whole. And so what you really need is that overall alignment around goals. And then you have product teams that are pushing hard to deliver and sort of pulling platform teams along, saying, hey, in order to deliver, we kind of need to solve this problem. We need to solve this problem. Our biggest concern is this. And that shared alignment is going to get you what gets you clarity about how to then go build the thing that helps you with those teams, or helps those teams, I guess. All right. And then lastly, let's talk about partnerships. This is a partnership. As I said, it's an interesting relationship between product engineers and platform engineers. I'm using product engineers sort of generically to speak of teams who are trying to build the capabilities the end customer are generally supported by platform engineering organizations. You want to work together. You want to get to a place where you're going to be successful together. One of the most common failure modes that I've witnessed and that I love to talk people through getting out of is this idea where effectively platform teams create work for other teams, right? We need X to happen. Therefore, we've described how you can do it. Now we need all the teams to do this, as opposed to, we understand a problem that you all are having, and we've created a way to make that problem go away. And sometimes the first step is, I need you to adopt a piece of my platform. Or if you want this piece to go away, if you want this problem to go away, you can use this capability of our platform. And now you're on the other side of an abstraction or an interface behind which I can continue to make change and improve things without forcing you to make more changes. There's a pattern that I've witnessed many times, again, which is a product team sets out with a bunch of goals for a quarter or a month or a sprint, doesn't really matter, some period of time where they have clarity about what really matters to the business and what they want to do. And then a platform organization comes along and says, cool, but we need you to upgrade how, your Helm charts or how you use whatever CVE scanner. Those things are much better managed by the platform. To me, that's the interface of the platform in a way that those changes are effectively opaque to the product team so they can keep focusing on the things that really matter to them. So one great way that I've heard this described was a platform engineering leader saying that they set the target for their team for a quarter because they were sort of off track to just go and get 10 thank you notes. Just really demonstrate that people cared about what they were doing and they were thankful for the problems that they were solving for them. And these don't have to be big problems. We talk about platforms and platforms sound big, but you can go solve very small, very targeted problems that other teams are not equipped to solve, make those problems go away, and start to build trust with those folks in a way that's going to, move things along. And so ultimately, I think you want to become a trusted advisor to those teams. Like, you're in a great spot as a platform organization, as a platform engineering team, when other teams are coming to you and saying, hey, we have a problem to solve. Do you know how to solve this? Because it feels like something that you would be great at, as opposed to you're the people that show up and make us feel like we have more work to do. So that's the way that I want you to think about this whole thing throughout the course of, again, we're about to talk to some awesome people, and let me jump into who that is in 1 second. But as we walk through this, we need to think about getting yourself to this state where people are coming to you saying, hey, we'd love it if you could solve this problem because you seem like the perfect people to solve this problem for us. So we've got a couple hours ahead, and we're going to hear from 4 amazing guests with different contexts. I think you probably read their intros. I'm going to introduce them again as we jump into this. But first up is Camille. Has been an engineering executive, multiple different places, and wrote the book, which I have next to me, on platform engineering, and is going to give us sort of hopefully a big picture lay of the land, how to think about all this stuff. Then we're going to jump into Randy, who's quoted actually in Camille's book, which is fortuitous interaction, but also has been doing this in practice in a bunch of different places. And we're going to talk through a couple of real world examples. Then we're going to hand it over to Raju, who's going to give a presentation on looking at this through the architect's perspective. And then we'll bring it all home with Teresa, who I just quoted, who will talk to us about really learning from customers and how to really build that relationship. So I think that's it for me for slides. I don't know how we unshare that, but I see Camille has jumped on, and we're gonna jump into that conversation. That was the light view of the, I guess, platform engineering book. I also have the manager's path on my desk just to prove that I have the whole collection. We're not going to reference that, don't worry. And then edited 97 things every engineering manager should know. So Camille's done a ton in this space. And is an absolute resource. Super excited to have you here. So let's jump into the first session. So I was saying at a high level, it's super easy to say like, hey, Camille wrote the book on this and be done with it. But I'm kind of interested, like, first of all, thank you. I think it's a huge service to take something that everyone is talking about with different words and different expressions, and that means different things to different people, and just put a line in the sand and say, what if platform engineering is this? And then we can just talk about it in that context, and that just accelerates so much conversation, right? There's just so much of redefining terms and stuff. So super appreciate it. But I guess I'd love to hear just a little bit of the impetus. Like, what were you seeing around you that said, this is important but confusing, a lot of people aren't getting this right, like it would be worth it for us to write something down? Like, what drove you to that moment?
Yeah, well, to your point of it's helpful to have somebody write something that says this is what we think it is. So my co-author Ian Nolan and I worked together at one company running platforms, and then we both have pretty significant experience running platform type teams at various sizes of companies. And so, we've been doing, I ran a team called Platform Engineering and joined that team back in 2017. So we've been doing it for a while. I'm not going to say that's the earliest platform engineering. I think the concept of platform engineering has been around for a long time, but I think people really started talking about it a lot in the Kubernetes days. So right around the 2017-ish timeframe. And then, what we were sort of observing was, first of all, these are hard teams to run. It's hard to run internal facing engineering teams in general. I think the scale and speed at which technology has moved in this space has been pretty remarkable over the last 7-8 years. And so what we're seeing is what we were seeing is a lot of people who were used to running either like sort of classic infrastructure teams where there was a much slower pace of work. There's more of a focus maybe on sort of your more traditional, either like physical infrastructure, data centers, networks, or databases or whatever. Or you would see people that actually didn't have any experience in that at all and were much more kind of general software engineers that were kind of trying to figure out how to do this infrastructural software stuff that makes up platform engineering. We also had, I think, a lot of new focus in the last decade or so on how do we make engineers more productive. It's just been such a big focal point. How do we apply technology to making engineers more productive, right? It's remarkable how many engineering teams still don't really do CI/CD, or they don't do it very well, right? And I think that, so you've got then kind of that angle coming in, all of the move to the cloud, all of the just, constant sort of evolution of software in the last decade. And I think the two of us thought we have a pretty rare set of experience as very comfortable, like large scale distributed systems engineers who have built a lot of big platforms at various types of companies that know a reasonable amount about, that part of the stack, and also about leading these kinds of teams, which is really a lot of this book is about the leadership element, right? So a lot of this book is really about like, if you've got a team building pretty complex software products, how do you do that successfully? And so that was kind of our impetus. Is we just thought we knew kind of how to do it because we've done it for a while, and a lot of people were trying to figure out how to do this, and we wanted to be able to put a stake in the ground and say, look, this is what we think it is. This is what we think it should be done. These are some of the problems we've seen ourselves face and others in our circle have faced over the years, and we want to help share, how we've overcome this.
Awesome. Well, again, very, very thankful for it. I think it makes a lot of people's lives easier to say, oh, just read this, instead of like walking everybody through it. So focus here today, product thinking for platform teams. And I feel a little bit weird about the fact that I now want to dive into abstractions, but to me, it's actually one of the core product problems of platform engineering teams, right? So many of the failure modes are, we deployed Kubernetes. Here's how you build your 800-line Helm chart to use Kubernetes. And to an engineer who's like, I just build front ends. Why am I learning this stuff, right? Why is this now my problem? That doesn't feel like you've helped me. And so I think you talk about it a lot. I think I'll say it's a software engineering sort of perspective or analogy towards building things. Makes a ton of sense to me. And so use the expression smoothing edges to sort of like simplify what other teams need to understand. How do you think about creating the right abstraction, the appropriate abstraction? Like, what's your sort of pathway to get there in terms of understanding teams and what they're doing, and then what you should present to them?
Yeah. So I think there's a few ways to go about this. So smoothing the edges, I sort of talk about in the chapter on product in the book. I talk about kind of two different approaches to identifying what you should be providing as a platform provider, one of which is smoothing the edges. So smoothing the edges is really, we have something that we kind of know everybody needs. So your CI/CD pipelines or platforms are a very common example here, right? Where, we don't really want every team to have to build this themselves or figure out how to do it and run it themselves. And, and so we've got something, and people are using it, but they're just kind of unhappy with it because there's a lot of different places where it's a little hard to use. It's a little, it's missing something that would make it better. It just doesn't support. It supports everything but mobile. It's whatever, right? And so a lot of what smoothing the edges is about looking at, something that exists in some form and asking, can we make this better? Can we make this easier to use? Can we improve the fact that you've got these two different tools that you're using for this problem and kind of make them provide kind of an abstraction that makes them work together in the way that we know you're going to need, that, connects these two tools together so that you don't have to be, I go through this tool to this point, but then I've got to switch over to this completely different thing, and it's a completely different, set of commands, what have you, right? So smoothing the edges is often about just finding those various like inconveniences and friction points for using some set of functionality that your developers already know they need and you maybe are already providing, and making that easier, right? And I think a lot of when you talk about like paved paths as platforms, right? That's a pretty common term for, what is a platform? Well, if you're at a company where we don't want to force everyone to, we're not the kind of company that forces everyone to use exactly these products, but we're going to make it really compelling to use these products by building paved paths that really streamline the process of, you don't really need to run your own Kubernetes. You don't need to build all these, Helm charts yourself. Like, we're going to make it very easy for anybody who wants to do this simple front end stuff to like just kind of deploy right here, click these buttons, set this thing up, and you're good to go, as long as you follow these patterns. Those are sort of examples of smoothing edges. And I think, smoothing edges, again, it's the kind of thing that makes sense when you have a relatively well adopted or, common needs platform that it needs to have lots of different, a reasonable variety of functionality to work. But you want to make it work pretty well for all the different people that are going to need to use it. And you can make a lot of progress just making it work better. Right. That is sort of in contrast to completely rethinking what you're doing, which I think people don't actually often do quite enough, which is to say, should we be having people have all of these different options that we're sort of trying to make them kind of work well enough together? Or should we be building something that's a little bit higher level and a little bit more of an abstraction that solves a concrete problem that we kind of own all of the underlying abstractions to solve it? So in the later parts of the book, Ian gives a good example of the evolution of a sort of data engineering team that he had to support, I forget exactly all the systems, but kind of a bunch of different like Elasticsearch and a couple of other systems where they were basically offering kind of open source as a service models. And so all of these different teams had their own instances of these open source systems that this data team was supporting. And that's a very hard thing to scale. If anybody in the audience has done that, that can be really hard to scale. You can put automation in place, but a lot of these open source systems just aren't really built to be kind of sublinearly scaled. And so the team is just constantly fixing things. They're constantly asking questions and, trying to enable another feature or, upgrade something for this team. Or they want a different data storage system. And why won't you just like let me use CouchDB or whatever, right? Give me this new thing, give me this new thing. And so they went through several different iterations trying to make it possible for their team to like safely scale. And what they eventually had to realize was that there were a couple of common use cases that were really meaningful across the company, that they should provide a very good very good sort of system that supports. So I believe it was configuration management was one of them. So they really needed to create something that could be kind of universally used by a bunch of different systems for some, sort of global, highly available configuration management. And if they could provide that, they could knock out a whole bunch of use cases with a sort of shared underlying system that they themselves could then sort of create, scale, and deploy, rather than having to support a bunch of sort of specialized infrastructure for every single team. They could sort of have, one option that's like, this is our standard SQL interface. This is what we provide if you need SQL. And this is what we provide if you need kind of the global key value. And we, in fact, in addition, have a really good interface in this global key value for dealing with config that we support for all kinds of applications on, right? And in that case, you're sort of rethinking the problem. The problem is not, how do I make it easier and easier and easier to scale an infinite variety of open source, wide interface open source systems, because this, every different developer at this company kind of wants a different thing. But how do I find the big shared underlying problems, build the right abstraction on a system that we think we can support to solve those problems, and then provide that to the engineers to use for that major problem set, kind of knocking it out of the equation?
Yeah. I think that perspective is really important. There's actually, I wasn't planning to go there yet, but there's an audience question that might have even been from my intro. But and I think it's super related, which is how can a team succeed when it's when there's scenarios, 50% support tickets, 10% firefighting, and the rest is migrations. And one of the things I'm thinking about as you describe that is you probably have a ton of sprawl and everyone's solving a problem differently, and you're just trying to, manage all those things as you were just describing in state engineering. So you need someone to help you get the breathing room to say, we could make 3 classes of problems go away if we consolidated around this and give everyone something that just does this well, right?
Yeah.
And then that gets us more breathing room and sort of build from there.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's, there's a huge part of the product management here. And often you're not really going to build your own like brand new system. There's often like a team has built a really good solution for this problem themselves that would not scale to the whole company. But if you sort of adopted and expanded that system and made it supportable to more and more of the engineering teams in the company, you would have something that is useful because there's already a team using it, right? They built it for themselves, but they were maybe just a little ahead of the game on seeing this as a systemized use case that could actually be, solved through some piece of software. But you as the platform team can kind of sort of own and expand that system to be solving more problems. But I agree, if your job is like you're constantly just thinking about migrations and support and firefighting, there is a level of you got to like take a step back and ask like, does the product offering that we have make sense? Often that is a sign that like we have too broad of a product offering for the number of engineers we have to support, and we've got to figure out a way to narrow that down.
Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense. And you highlighted a really interesting point in there, which is that you've got great working examples, right? People have solved their own problems at some point and expressed this is a problem that needs solving. And likely you have 2 or 3 teams solving the same problem, but differently. And we were talking just before about Wardley maps and diffusion, but I'll bring it in here because I'm kind of obsessed with this concept. But like, that would be the Genesis N for anyone who doesn't know, then look up Simon Wardley and Wardley maps. But at the left of the chart, you've got Genesis, which is people just inventing new things. And at the far right, you have commodities, right? Like I turn on power and it's just there. It's always there. Well, 99% of the time it's there, right? Like I just expect it to exist and to be something that I don't have to think about. And the thing about the Genesis side that's interesting is that's an expression of need, right? Like people are trying different things. And they've expressed to you, hey, this is, and I guess speaking of migrations, if you take something that someone has already built, that's one fewer migration that someone has to perform later, right? The interface is already there. They've already used it. Now you're making it scalable as you described. So is there kind of a playbook for doing the one thing I have witnessed is 3 people have built 3 different things and you're saying we're picking this one, right? Do people choose to do the 4th just so they don't have to have that argument? Like how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, look, that is always tough because if you've got 3 people that have picked 3 different things, each of them is going to have very good reasons why they picked it, and they are going, and some percentage of the time those reasons are real. A lot of percentage of the time they just don't want to move. They didn't like the other system offerings for whatever aesthetic reason, and they're going to be unhappy about moving. And I am of 2 minds on this. So I am not a fan of like forcing to one solution where you don't need to. Now, if you have to support all of the different solutions, I think that's a different story, right? So like, that's one of the things I like about the sort of paved path notion that, companies like Netflix have is like, look, if you want to support your own stuff, go nuts. But we're not going to support you if you're off of sort of the blessed approved path. But if you're on the blessed approved path, you're going to get a lot more support from this central team or this platform or whatever, because hey, like we know how to run this stuff. We know how to support it. We know how to operate it. And we've taken that ownership. And so I think it is somewhat unrealistic to expect central teams to support like a huge variety of overlapping offerings. On the other hand, I think where you can say, look, here's the cost of you running it yourself, but if you really, really want to do it, I guess, like that's not the worst thing in the world, especially when you're not talking about 3 things that are kind of the same solution, but you're going forward, right? So I think one risk that platform teams have is you try to really lock down innovation and say like, well, we're the platform team. If you need something new in this space, it has to come through us. Like we have to be the ones to do it because it's platform and we are the experts. And, then the reality is like, you know what, you can't be the experts because a lot of your time is going to be spent on more mature offerings, on scaling, on operating, on, evolving things that are, going from that early stage to something that is more settled and established. And it may not be all the way to the commodity infrastructure of the far end of the worldly map, but like you're much more in the middle. And so, when something brand new comes out, you just may not really have the time to think about it and evaluate it. And it may not make sense for you to be investing in integrating into your system. So if you get too too sort of rigid about nobody can deviate from, the offerings of the platform. And if you have something, if you need something that is deviating from our offerings, too bad. Like you have to wait for us to have time to accommodate you. I think that's a very limiting way to approach platforms. So while I do think that it is always an uncomfortable situation when you now have 3 different things that do kind of the same thing, and you do often need to pick a winner that you're going to sort of adopt and embrace and expand in the platform. But I think that is better than never allowing anyone to experiment and actually find kind of the right fit, and really slowing down innovation by because the platform team doesn't want it to happen.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. And you had some discussion in the book about inner source and sort of like different ways to allow people to explore, some that work well and some that don't. And I really think about, you're talking about interfaces and abstractions, but how do you build a platform that others can build on top of, even if the thing they're building is sort of platformy? And then again, to that point of diffusion, when it's really clear that more people need that, great, now we can take it and adopt it, but we don't need to build all the things. To your point, first of all, you don't have to wait for us to build it. Second of all, we don't need to be the ones building anything or everything in order for you to move, right? Because then you end up with entirely separate shadow platforms kind of thing, which is probably not what you want. Take as much as you can from the platform and then build on something.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the challenge with this talking about this is that it's very hard to talk about in the abstract, right? And in some sense, like, so what are some examples of good platforms? Kubernetes is actually quite a good platform. And I would say, if you want to think about, if you want to sort of kind of internalize what these might mean, good platforms that can be built upon do need to have some notion of like, how do you plug things in? How do we think about the places where they could be expanded or plugged into? How do you think about moving up and down the sort of abstraction stack? So, if you look at, for example, compute offerings in the public clouds, they actually, one of the nice things that public cloud providers have done is they have made it possible for you to move up and down the stack of abstraction and compute. So you can get like the actual server and you can, infrastructure as a service, or you can get something a little bit more abstracted, or you can get something that's like a function as a service where you're really way far abstracted, right? And you're just sort of throwing some code and you're not really thinking about the underlying service at all, right? And so for depending on what you are building, you have the option to kind of drop down to different levels of abstraction. That's a really, really hard thing to do, to be honest, to be very clear with all of you. Like, I am not going to sit here and claim that that's a very easy thing to do, which is why I actually think that a lot of good platforms that are more like a lot of good platforms that are more specific than sort of your general, Kubernetes type compute or S3 type storage or whatever, actually are aimed at kind of a common type of business problem in your company. So I've worked in finance for a long time. Good platforms in finance, one big area where you tend to see them is actually running massive mathematical simulation. And you tend to see systems that are really built up to match the kind of storage and user and simulation and job sort of characteristics of, I need to run, different types of, from anything from like something that's very interactive to something that's long running. And we're starting to see this as a general thing in machine learning systems and AI systems now. But like for a long time, that was a kind of a niche thing where you saw in a little bit of like AI stuff. And then you saw a lot in finance companies that needed to have very specific like simulation type platforms that had lots of different levels of interactivity needs. But ultimately, they're not trying to solve every single general purpose computing problem or every problem that the company would offer. They were solving a very common big use case for the company and combining components to create a platform that solved that use case really well. And I think that that's where a lot of really valuable platforms actually end up coming from, right? You're not probably going to build OpenStack. You're not going to build Heroku. That's probably not what you should be doing, right? You shouldn't be trying to solve every single general purpose computing problem, because a vendor or the cloud or both or some combination or some open source project probably has done that. You need to think about, for my company, what are the like sort of combinations of systems that need to interoperate really well together for people to solve a very big common business problem for us. That's where a lot of, I think, the juice in your platforms is really actually going to come from, and not as much like the, again, we're not AWS, most of us, right? So like being able to think through the different layers of abstraction of compute, exposure, is not something I think that's expected of most of us, or could be expected of most of us.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. The like use case specific, like what are the common patterns in my getting back to product thinking, what are the common patterns in my organization? I see many people trying to solve for the same thing and running up against challenges. How can I enable a collection of folks to solve those? All right, I'm going to go back to a different question, but there were a couple questions about just what we're talking about. So number one, for anyone who hasn't been able to figure it out, this book, Platform Engineering, was written by Camille and her co-author Ian. So when I say in the book, that's generally what I'm talking about. And the other thing was the maps, Wardley maps. So Simon Wardley, Wardley, if you're looking for those. I find them super interesting as a strategic tool, and also they bring some concepts in. And actually, you referenced a bunch, pioneers, settlers, and town planners, which is a different Simon Wardley thing that I would also highly recommend people think about, because it talks about effectively the evolution of, it might be platforms, might be product, could be anything from sort of early stage exploration through to scale, and the kinds of people and personalities that you need in place to make those successful. So just since we're on that topic. And then there was on the like letting people self-support, there was an interesting question that it just gave me a little sense of dread. So I'll throw it out there for you and for everybody, which is what do you do when that one person on the team that decided they could self-support and built their whole little internal platform leaves, and now they can't self-support? And my gut reaction is that somebody should have noticed earlier that because that was going to happen. But I'm super curious if you have any thoughts on that particular scenario, because I think it's one that we see a bunch.
Yeah, I mean, look, if your managers aren't paying attention or aren't willing to have unpleasant conversations with people where they say, no, you can't do that. I mean, this is going to happen, right? Like this happens. It happens everywhere that there is stuff that is abandoned. And actually that brings me to, we're just going to have a random conversation here. Sorry, Rob. But so that brings me to like a weird side point, which is that I actually think a lot of the potential and value in modern platforms, particularly when you're talking about more of the infrastructure side platforms, is thinking about how you are tracking all of the inventory in a live way, all the sort of software and system related inventory in your company, which, first of all, startups never bothered to think about, in my experience anyway. Big companies often had like really like old like configuration management database things, CMDBs, or something that was sort of old and like very like IT sort of mindset stuff. But in my experience, one of the more powerful things that you can do if you have a platform that's sort of wired up effectively, and certainly in the modern world, is actually really start to get a lot of observability about who owns what code bases that create what systems that deploy to what places. And as you start to know that, then you can say, okay, well, Bob is the person who created the code that built this platform that owns this thing. And Bob left, who's Bob's manager? Because guess what? That's where that system goes. Like the system is inherited in sort of the reporting chain. Now, this never actually works perfectly in practice, but there's a huge amount of power to having reasonably fine-grained observability of the state of the software and infrastructure and deployment stack that I think is, an underdeveloped concept in a lot of places. If you do it well, it supports a ton of advanced automation. It supports, making a lot of those things like those migrations a lot easier, right? Maybe AI will do some magical thing with this in the future. I don't know. But when you're starting to ask the question about what happens when someone leaves and they were the only person that knew system X. I mean, look, that's going to happen to all of us eventually, no matter what you do. But having some way of even knowing that system X exists before it breaks is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Keep it on the clock, and I got a lot of stuff that I want to try to cram in the last few minutes. But I'll just say to your point of the manager, one, consequences and accountability. There should have been some planning, and now as a manager, I need to sort that out. Maybe I'll learn a lesson from that. But I think there's a lot of, I talked about that in paved roads, maybe not as much accountability for delivering value to the business, and therefore I can go off and wander in the wilderness and play with technology, right? So I think that's huge. But since we're talking about humans, let's jump into humans for a second. I mean, that's a big part of product, is managing people's feelings and emotions. And one word that I wrote down a bunch of times was hype. And there's a lot of just this product or this technology will save us, that technology will save us. My peer at this other company deployed a platform team and now no one has to do any work, those sorts of things. How do you separate the noise? The other thing that you talked about a little bit that really struck me was the conference hype. Someone tells you the story of how they built an amazing platform, but they don't tell you that no one adopted it and it actually didn't help the business at all. And then everyone comes home from the conference we got to build that, right? And then the stakeholder management is the same thing. So how do you kind of know where to focus, put people's attention, and sort of keep the hype at bay?
Yeah, I mean, look, so I think that some of this is you want to have some sense of what problem is this actually going to solve for us? So I think that a lot of times when people, see a good conference talk and they come and they're just we're going to implement this, they don't do the product work of talking to the customers, right? So they haven't done the work of being if we had a system that could do X, would that be useful for a team, right? And so I think that, I do think that some of this is just basic product management, taking the time to do a little bit of more of the product management before you jump into some big new technology is a good idea. Do you have a market appetite for that? When you talk to people about this technology that could solve these problems, not only are they excited about it, but would they make time and would they make the time to start using it, right? Because it is a cost to start to use a new thing. A new thing becomes available that says not just free to them. They've got to migrate. They've got to learn how to use the product. They've got to, they've got to make time for it in their busy application dev lifecycle schedules, right? So I think, don't miss the part of sort of the product management market research work when you want to introduce something new, to make sure that there really is kind of a market for it. There are people that want to use this and will make the time to adopt it. And then, the stakeholder management side, right? The important thing there is really just that, I think it can be easy to get really insular and focused entirely on what you're building and maybe the people that are using your products. But stakeholders are not just the people that are using your products. They're the managers of those people. They're the people that aren't using it, but that are reliant on the engineering teams that are using your products, that don't understand why we have this big tech team that's building this stuff that isn't actually delivering directly to our customers or to the business or what have you. And so stakeholder management, is important because platform teams need to realize that they need to be seen as delivering value to the business by the people who run the business and not just by the engineers. And so how are you explaining the work you're doing? How are you, talking about your accomplishments and your impact in a way that doesn't just resonate with engineers, but that actually may resonate with, the VP of product or, the CFO or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's great. And there was a question about measuring ROI. I'm going to say that was the answer so I can knock off another audience question because people are asking the right question. So I want to talk about rituals. I mentioned this before. For those in the audience, I am a big fan. We at CircleCI are big fans of rituals and the concept of rituals, which is we don't just say that we value something, but we behave and act in a way that expresses that we value that thing. And so from my three, I'm going to ask all the guests, hopefully today, if I can make it happen, for the three things I talked about in the intro. I'd love an example of a ritual for each of these, or maybe just, one or two. We'll see how it goes. One, focusing on the customer and customer problems, which you just talked about. I'll give them to you one at a time so that you don't have to remember them all. How about that? So a ritual for making sure that you're focusing on customer problems.
I mean, I guess the easiest one is probably just customer satisfaction surveys, making sure you're doing those and reading and listening to the responses.
Love it. You're going first, so you get no one's allowed to repeat, so you get the easy ones. All right. Ritual to create the right organizational conditions for success.
I mean, ritual to create the right organizational conditions for success. You, the leader of your organization, you need to run your team as a team. If you run your team as a set of silos, you will never create the organizational conditions for success. So wherever you are, manager, is the layer below you acting like they are a team, or are they acting like they are a bunch of silos that barely need to interact?
Love it. Look up First Teams if you're not following that. Number 3, a ritual to build a partnership with your customer, aka the product teams.
Co-development, co-ownership of some major goal where you are either embedding with them or, sort of working side by side with them to deliver something critical that is also critical for their product launch, so that you are really seen as a direct contributor to product success.
Love it. Perfect. I think we nailed the timing. Camille, thank you so much. You've earned the right to stick around and heckle Randy if you want. I don't know how we would do that, but so I know that you know him well. Anyway, super obvious. Not only did you take the time to sit down and write the book, but it's super obvious talking to you that you've lived and breathed this. You've thought about it deeply, and just such a huge contribution for you to show up here and share your experiences with everybody. So super appreciative. Thanks for just winging it with me. This has been awesome. Appreciate you
so much. Take care.
Next up, we're going to move on to Randy Shoup, who I'm guessing is going to join in a second here, but I'll start with the intro. So Randy is currently SVP of engineering at Thrive Market, but has been doing this for a long time. We don't need to get into numbers because, me too. But has just been built public platforms, right? App Engine, maybe, I don't know if we'll get into that at some point, built internal platforms, supported teams, doing this, just a ton of different as well as complex distributed systems. I mean, we could spend 35 minutes on your intro, Randy, so I won't bore everyone. I also happen to have the pleasure of knowing Randy for a long time, and have been blessed with many of his insights and many different perspectives. But we're going to spend a bunch of the time here talking about a particular case study, which was your second time at eBay. Returned to, I'll let you talk about it a little bit. Well, I'm going to let you talk about it a lot, actually, but returned to effectively help sort out velocity problems, help sort of drive higher efficiency. I think in the write-up, you typically say doubled throughput for some organizations, which I think some portion of the organization that participated, those numbers are, honestly, I think they're a little unheard of, right? I guess they're heard of because they exist, but when you say that, right, people think, I'm super interested to hear what people how they respond. I think, sure, right? That didn't actually happen. And so I'm super excited to just get into all the details and understand it, because I do know that it happened. But that's a hard thing to get people's heads over or around, I guess is the right expression. And one of the things that I see a lot with really high performing teams, and the goal to get to high performing, is the people that aren't there don't believe that it's possible. And so we'll come back around to this, but I really want to spend some time thinking about and talking about how do you get that enough belief to get people to commit to then witness it and sort of become the true believers, if you will. But I'm way ahead of myself. So just to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit about that return to eBay, what you were setting out to do, and a little bit just, the high overview of how everything went?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Rob. It's always fun to get the opportunity to talk with you, as we have the opportunity to do in several fora. So hi, I'm Randy Shoup. I I am currently SVP of engineering at Thrive Market, which Rob mentioned, but we're really going to talk about what I did 5 years ago from 2020 to 2022, when I returned to eBay as the chief architect. I'd worked there 15 years earlier as an individual contributor for quite a long time on the search engine infrastructure, learned a ton about distributed systems and scaling, and then did different things, led engineering at Stitch Fix, worked at Google on Google App Engine, a bunch of other things, in the intervening 9 years. And then, I was asked back as chief architect, basically to solve the problem of eBay was too slow. And, a lot of companies say that, and mostly they're right. But eBay was really too slow. And, you look at other eBay competitors, the Amazons of the world, and Amazon's able to move really quickly and eBay wasn't. And so, what could we do to make that better? I also had the benefit of running the platform engineering organization. So I both had the chief architect-y hat, but also, led the platform engineering organization, which you could think of as an execution arm for all the things we were going to talk about. So before I had joined, there was this nascent initiative that was called Velocity, which is again about how to make eBay faster and really the entire end-to-end product development lifecycle at eBay. So from idea to software development to software delivery, all the way through to post-release iteration. And so when I arrived, so there's no disagreement that we needed to move a lot faster, but there wasn't obvious exactly what particular areas to prioritize and work on. So we're using a lot of lean terminology here. I did a value stream map. So which is basically look at the entire process of developing products at eBay as a workflow. And so it starts with an idea and it progresses through all these different stages and all these different, kind of steps. And at the end of which there's a feature that hopefully provides value to customers at the end of it. And the thing you do with the value stream map is you just measure how long does it take to do a thing and how long are you waiting to do the next thing. And sometimes the opportunities are in how long it takes to do a thing, but often the opportunities, maybe more often the opportunities is how often you're having to wait between, well, I'm done committing my code, says the wonderful engineer, but why does it take me 10 days before it actually shows up as a feature? So as part of doing that value stream map, we work with a bunch of individual teams. We asked them where their challenges and opportunities were. As soon as we started talking, there were, just to give a sense of the size, like when I was there, it was 4,000 engineers and 4,500 applications and services in production. So, pretty substantial. Couldn't talk to everybody, but we chose several different sort of candidate teams and talk with them. And by the time we started talking with the third team, we were hearing, the same sort of 80% of things over and over again. And happy to go into the details of there, but I'll just pause that at that point.
Well, I'm super interested. It sounds like after 3 teams, you started to hit the duplication and sort of repetition of problems. But, you said, okay, we ask everybody. This is great. We're talking about product thinking. That's pretty basic. Let's ask the customer. But often, talking about prioritization, often what you get when you ask customers is some combination of very specific, like I need this, as opposed to here's my problem that I'm trying to solve and feel free to solve it any way you can, and too much, right?
Yeah.
Great. But which of these is going to be the most impactful? What should we prioritize first? So what was the process of kind of deciding where you would invest?
Yeah, great question. As with any, I'll answer it in 2 ways. The first way I'll answer it is how did the people aspect of it work, if that makes any sense. So again, as I mentioned, we started this process by talking to teams and assessing where they were. And then in terms of prioritization, well, I guess there's 2 aspects to it, maybe multiple aspects. Number one is we also needed to assess where we were in an objective way. And so fortunately, we were doing this in 2020 because the Accelerate book had come out in 2018. And that's Nicole Forsgren, Gene Kim, and Jess Humble. And that has popularized the so-called 4 key metrics, or the 4 DORA metrics, which measure the capabilities of software delivery. And the thing that I didn't say, was as we looked across all the different areas where eBay could be improved in terms of planning, oh my gosh, it could be improved. Software development also, software delivery also. What became clear is that software development and software delivery central area was the area of biggest bang for the buck, or the biggest opportunity for us. And that was because things that we would like to do, like make the architecture more decoupled, do lots more things in parallel, et cetera, were all gated on the ability of the teams at eBay to deliver consistently and reliably and repeatably small units of work, right? So eBay has been, I'm going to say really good. eBay, over its 30-some year history, has done a lot of really massive entire company level initiatives. And I've been a part of a bunch of those. And most of those, frankly, didn't succeed. Not because eBay is horrible, but because it's hard to get an entire company all moving, 4,000 people all moving in the same direction if you're trying to change all 4,000 people's behavior at once. So the insight, and it's not mine, but it's just, this is how things work, change works in the world, is instead of trying to make it a 4,000 engineer problem, have a few targeted teams that are that would be willing to join a pilot of, hey, which teams want to be better? And you could go to as I did, I could go to the executives and like, which handful of your teams do you want to be better? And they're like, oh man, this one, this one, this one. And we collected a set of these pilot teams, and we worked very tightly with them on, well, what do they need? And even within those teams, don't tell me all the applications and services you build, choose the most important 5 or 10, and we'll focus on those. So just like every dimension of trying to take this monster problem of 4,000 people and 4,500 applications and make it a smaller tactical problem. And coming around to answering one of the questions that you kind of posed initially in your intro is, well, how do you get people to see that things could be better? That's how. That's how, because there had been a number of, we're going to do this agile transformation, didn't do anything. We're going to move to services, that didn't do anything. So exactly because trying to do a massive entire company initiative all at once, everybody moves like a tenth of a step forward every month, a tenth of a step forward, and like you exhaust your patience before you get any value. Whereas instead, the way to make real change in the large is to make it in a targeted way in the small, get people who are really excited about being a little bit early adopters or a little bit, ahead of the rest of the curve at eBay, and use that as, well, and those are exemplars. So like now, okay, other teams, now let's do what these pilot teams did. And just to draw the thread to the end, or to where we currently are. So I was there for those 2 years, but most of my team continued on with the work that we started together. And I've been recently reconnecting with them over the last month or two. And where we started with a couple of pilot teams that were like 10% of the teams of the company, it has now expanded to the entire suite of applications and services at eBay. So over those 5 years, slowly but steadily, every quarter, more teams, more applications. And so it's spread virally, across the whole company.
That's amazing. Yeah. To your point of the previous efforts, right? It's like everybody's doing a little bit. It doesn't really land. So now you have some evidence that like, and is the next team, right? I'm sure it follows I bet there's some order. Doesn't feel like there's probably some pattern to the sequence, right? Like the next teams that said, wait a second, it is possible. Look at them. They're doing it. Like, could we be more like that? How come they get to go fast? Like what did that look like? What were the characteristics of kind of those next up folks that were saying, we want to be like that?
Yeah, great. The pilot teams were absolutely, it was a sort of a double opt-in, by which I mean the teams were motivated to work with us and we were motivated to work with them. So, that was easier to make the choice, if that makes any sense. Over time, it's exactly an adoption curve where, so there's like early adopters, early majority, late majority, laggards, right? Like, so finding the next fact after the early adopters, finding the, innovators and early adopters, that's relatively straightforward because they show themselves, right? They like, and we actually had a bunch of this situation where like we started with trying to only have 8 teams, and enough teams shoehorned their way in that the pilot grew to like 12 to 15. So it was getting close to whether I wanted to be able to manage that level or not. But again, that was super exciting that people were like, hey, you're going to do continuous delivery, you're going to do automated testing, you're going to do canaries, you're going to do all this stuff. I want to be a part of it. So that initial part of the adoption phase was mostly team led. And then the laggards, tend to be more top-down exec-driven, if that makes any sense. Slash,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to ask about the laggards. Like, are there characteristics of the laggards? They have, well, we've still got the mainframe COBOL thing, and it doesn't fit your, or is it just this personality and style? Like, what?
I mean, I think it's all of the above,
there?
right? It's all of the above. I mean, in many ways, these are sort of personality types, as applied to teams. So there absolutely were teams that were like, we didn't have any COBOL mainframes, but we did have 35-year-old code, that ran the payment system and blah blah blah, and so there were a bunch of those things where like, go away with your millennial fancy continuous delivery stuff, Randy. We've got real money to move around. Talk to me when you're serious, and so there a lot of it is sort of like feeling like they're too business critical to take a pause to fix things, and I can talk about why I think that's an incorrect way of looking at the world, but that as a fact, people have that way of looking at the world. That's fine. We're too important to be better, or to risk anything. And then, sometimes it's also, personalities of the teams, or just feeling like this is going to be too much of a burden for me, and so on. So, but overall, one of the things that eBay is good at is like, once the slow moving wheels move, it continues moving, if that makes any sense. So like, once it's like first gear or like really slow truck gear, so like there's a lot of effort to like get it going, but like it's correctly for this thing, it's hard to stop, if that makes any sense. Like it gets some inertia in a good way, or momentum is a better way to say it, behind the initiative. And so, as you said, just to like, I don't know, because I pat the backs of my team, who I'm really proud of, the end result was that teams we work with doubled their, what we say, engineering productivity. The proper way to say that is flow velocity. We can talk separately if people are interested in the exact measurement, but it's essentially, given a team, how many features and bug fixes can they do per unit time, right? So like in a week, in a month, they used to be doing X number of features and bug fixes. Now they're doing 2X. And it's mostly not because, it is in no case because they are working more hours. It is in every case removing those waiting states and and like making the individual tasks a lot faster, speeding up builds, speeding up startup time, automated canary deployments, automated rollbacks, all sorts of tools and capabilities that made it really easy to go from a developer is done with her, committed with her code, and it goes all the way to production with no manual effort.
Yeah. Well, you made a couple interesting points in there that tie to some of the questions that I'm seeing from the audience. So I'm going to go off script and jump to theirs. Also, my dog's about to go off script, so that'll be fun. So you mentioned metrics, and there's a couple of questions about measurement, in particular, like KPIs, OKRs. Like, did you set something? Okay, you're a pilot team, and now you need to get to twice as fast. That sounds like it would be a really hard conversation to have, as opposed to let's just see what we can do. Like, how did you think? And then I guess, how do you relay that? We talked, Camille and I talked about relaying that up to stakeholders, right? How do we say, okay, here's what we got for the effort? Yeah, no, fantastic question. And I do like hour-long talks about this, which people should Google if they want to. As soon as we did that value stream map, the very next thing that we did was, okay, how are we going to measure our current state of the world and progress? And again, the fact that we lived in the world of 2020 as opposed to pre-2018 is super valuable, because we just used the software delivery metrics of that are those 4 DORA. So deployment frequency for a given application and service. How often are you deploying to production? Lead time for change. So what's the time from when a developer commits her code to it shows up providing value on the site? Change failure rate. When we do one of those deployments, how often do we have to roll it back or hotfix it? And then mean time to restore. When there's an incident or an outage, how quickly can we restore service back to customers? And so there's a whole bunch of science which people should read about. I'm not going to talk about it right now, but the entire Accelerate, the second half of the Accelerate book is all the science behind why you should believe these 4 metrics matter, and why they predict software delivery performance and also business performance. The very best businesses are
do these things better than everyone else. So we kind of showed up, or I showed up already knowing the objective set of metrics that I wanted us to measure. And one of my teams had already put together a dashboard that was measuring some aspects of these things. The team wasn't yet familiar with Dora. I introduced them to that and to the book. We all read it. And actually, it's this little side thing. Like when I showed up, one of the people on that team was so proud. They said, "Oh, we have this wonderful metric about like team engineering performance or whatever. And it's this weighted combination of all these different factors with an exponential decay." And I'm like, well, I'm a math major. I know why exactly you put all that stuff in the thing, but it's way too complicated. What if we had, I don't know, 4 separate metrics and you didn't try to combine them? I'm like, oh, that'd be a lot easier. You're like, you're right. And turns out, here's this book that says those 4 things are the right ones to measure. So I was very pleasantly surprised, to be honest, to show up and like, we were within 3 days able to put together that dashboard. And it's been continually refined over the last 5 years. But one of the first things I wanted to do was put real measurements in place. And that was what we did. So we asked teams to improve those metrics. In other words, we asked them to improve their deployment frequency, improve their lead time for change. We did actually it was only those 2. We looked at them all, but we weren't saying, please improve your change failure rate or please improve your MTTR, as was predicted by the book and as actually happened. Once you start focusing on removing bottlenecks to speed, the quality stuff comes for free. So those were the like day-to-day, or not day-to-day. Those were the like monthly metrics that we were looking at with individual teams, and those would get rolled up, at higher levels of the organization. What we did not say is, we are forcing you to double your productivity. That was a side effect, and I didn't know what it was going to be. I hoped it would be significant, and it was. So that's a quick answer there.
Well, there's some interesting psychology there. I mean, first of all, I just want to repeat what you just said.
Please.
Going faster, improved quality. Like, we've been wrong about that for decades, right? You could choose one of these 2. Do you want to go faster? Do you want to have higher quality? Like, one drives the other. You can read it in a book, but Randy is telling you right now, like, we did this and we saw it happen. And I don't want anyone to miss that point. So I was going to say that again. And I was actually thinking, you mentioned earlier, your flow was features and bugs. How many of the bug fixes? Sorry, we're not delivering bugs, we're delivering bug fixes. There's lots of hot debate, or was maybe 15 years ago, in sort of agile community about whether you story point your fixes and stuff like that. But was there a decline in the number of bug fixes that you were having to execute? Because you didn't partition those out in that. But if you're saying quality improved, then likely you're actually, reducing the amount of sort of rework, I guess, that was happening.
It's a great question. I want to be very objective and say I don't know the exact answer to your question. Again, there's a reason why this book and the state of DevOps research behind it does not measure count of bugs. They tried that. It didn't really work because it's actually an output, not an outcome, right? If you think about it. The outcome is I don't have, what's the actual, I mean, the fact that I have a list of bugs, doesn't say anything about the customer experience. One thing that does actually correlate or be causally related is whether I have to hotfix it, like how important this thing is. So you can call that the P0, highest priority, like whatever word you want to use in your own thing, but they weren't able to find anything super tangible that they could statistically hold on to, if that makes sense, around bug count. But we should absolutely expect the bug count to go down. So we made 5x improvements on the speed metrics. So that's deployment frequency and lead time. And then without focusing on them, we got 3x improvements on the quality metrics. And again, to your point, triple underline, all aspects of the research behind this book show that companies cluster. If you're good at speed, you're good at quality. If you're terrible at speed, you're terrible at quality. And the ways to get from the one to the other are all these continuous delivery, lean practices.
Yeah. Awesome. So it's a little bit of a change in topic, but another great question from the audience, which is, I'm going to read it and then I'm going to interpret it a little bit. But are product managers on your team able to split from KTLO, scrums, prioritization, et cetera, to focus primarily on the pilot. So how does a product team insulate the pilot so that it can do that without being negatively impacted by other work? And I will say, I'm going to take a guess just because I'm super curious. That is the work. Like a lot of times that is the work. You're just getting better at doing that work. Like I think if you, maybe I'm misinterpreting the question, but I would assume saying, hey, let's go try to be fast by not doing any of the maintenance on our systems, for example, you would basically be proving something in a bubble that you can't actually live and breathe day to day kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Let me ask it. I don't want to say product managers because I think that gets us off track a little bit. But the question is, how does a product team focus on doing this work with Randy versus other things? Like that's a totally legitimate prioritization question.
Right.
And that was absolutely a conversation. This was partly, I guess, for the pilot teams. Again, this was like, what teams want to be faster? We're here to help you. And they're like, well, I want to be faster. If you're here to help, awesome. And so a lot of times, in the beginning, it was teams again forcing their way, wanting to be part of the program. In the longer term, but also, hey, Randy, are you pretending that it's zero work to like have a good CI/CD pipeline to write good automated? Like, no, I'm not pretending that's easy at all. I am saying though that it is an investment that with the leaders of those teams and the leaders of those organizations, we agreed made sense. And then that's again on the early adopter side, it was very like double opt-in. Again, on the lagger side, it was this, okay, random laggard payments team, time for your velocity workup. And they're like, oh no, but then they double their productivity anyway. But to connect this up with platform teams, sorry to interrupt you briefly.
No, go ahead.
And just so echoing all the things that you and Camille talked about, which is, well, how do we get, so I only didn't talk any about the enablement part. So like we work with all the product teams. A lot of it was just like, change your behaviors, code review more quickly, and then there were a ton of things that the platform team could provide, where it's like, okay, we made all your builds faster because we did all these things. We made your startup time faster because we did all these things. We built this or assembled this canary deployment capability, so we were able to do more automation. And the way to get that going with those individual teams was exactly what Camille said, which is embedding. So I had like several super senior individual contributors that I would, in my phrase, send out into the provinces. They would go out and they would embed with entire organizations and go, hi, my name is Justin. My name is Dave. My name is Vince. And I'm here to help you be faster. And they're like, really, what can you do? I'm like, I can do anything. I can type for you. I can help you figure out what's blocking you, blah, blah, blah. And that relationship with the platform team had never existed. And so that's great, obviously, for the product teams that are the customers, but it's also great for the platform team, frankly. So when I arrived, very good, well-meaning, long-tenured people on the platform team, and they were like, well, here's what our roadmap is. And I'm like, have you talked to anybody about what you're doing? Because it wasn't obvious to me that those were the right things to work on. And they're like, well, no, not really. Like we put this roadmap together and then we roll it out and they have to use it. I'm like, well, guess what? There's a better way of doing it, which is a bit of product thinking and a bit of talking to your customers. And there was a tiny bit of resistance, like, oh man, the customers hate us. Like, no, really shocking. But guess what? I bet if we start talking to them and we start doing things that make their lives better, it's going to be good. And it was. Nobody would want to go back.
I think that the analogy that is it's not much of a stretch, right? Product managers building consumer-facing product, right? If they were to say, we built a great thing and we're going to mandate users to use it, like, of course, that's like a non-existent conversation, right? And there's just real consequences. Like your business doesn't exist if you can't figure out how to get, like, to attract consumers, find product market fit. Like that's ultimately what you're trying to do, right? You're building a thing and you want people to use that thing. Yes, it is to help them, but it needs to be, as Camille was saying, it takes work to adopt a new thing. Therefore, the return on investment has to be significant enough that I'm going to go make that a priority right now to go do that thing. And I just don't think you learn that unless you know, as you said, go out into the provinces, spend time, right? Watch people work, observe them, understand where their challenges are, and help them see. I'm going to guess, like, people will tell you what they think their problem is, but they've been repeating it to each other for so long that maybe they don't actually see the problem. And sometimes you just show up in a room and watch people work and go, are y'all serious right now?
Yeah.
Like, it's so evident to me where your problem is, right?
That's the other aspect of the embedding, where like you can ask people, and we did, you know, till the cows come home, what their problem is, but then you embed this person who's seen it done right for many years into the team, and they're like, guess what? You guys, you need to fix this and this and this and this. I'll say two things. The framing that really worked well for me when I would go to talk to these teams, you know, with my colleagues, of course, was, hey, I see from the metrics in this beautiful dashboard that you're releasing once every 2 weeks, once a month. If I told you had to release every day, tell me all the reasons you can't. And they're like, how long do you have, Randy? You want the whole list or just the top 150? But that was a really good framing. Because sometimes people would say, it's impossible for us to do daily deployments. I'm like, well, that's not true, but I'm here to help you make it possible. Tell me all the reasons you can't. Oh man, well, because it takes so much manual effort to do this. Whenever I release a change to my service, manually, all my dependencies want to individually check, sign off. And it was like all these different things that were like the teams and the organization had somehow done it to themselves, and we were lacking some technology which we needed to add, and so on. Anyway, so that question really framed things. The other thing I would say, I'm so strongly a believer, particularly at large scale, of the paved path idea of, here's a thing that's extremely well supported by a good and well-resourced central team. If you want to go off in your own thing, you're on your own. But the way to say that is, it needs to be strictly better on every metric than buying, borrowing, stealing the thing for the product team. And it is correct on both sides for the product team to get to choose the platform rather than the platform forcing itself on the product team. Why? It's because the incentives are now in the appropriate place for both sides of that thing. Shouldn't be sides, but you see what I mean. The product team should choose exactly the right thing for them. Hey, if you're doing machine learned models like eBay's standard Java Spring thing, that is not what you use, right? That is not what you use for machine learned models, and it shouldn't be, and that's fine. It's not meant for that. So the product team should choose what's best for them, and the platform team again has that competition. I love your framing of that. It's exactly a vendor-customer relationship where the platform team is strongly incented to do the right thing, exactly because the customers have other choices.
Right. I often use this metaphor of a restaurant for chefs. You know what I mean? Like, I could totally do this on my, like, if the food's not good enough, I'll just go home and
make it myself.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not true in all cases, right? Like, no, I can't build a social network because I don't like the ones that are on. I mean, okay, I could, but like, generally speaking, the consumers of those. Whereas in this case, like, your customer is very similar to you. Like, they have all the tools, right? So it's a fascinating dynamic. Okay, I'm going to get to the rituals in 1 second because I'm keeping an eye on the clock, but I wanted to ask you one thing about sort of post eBay.
Sure.
You took on this role. I forget the exact timing, but maybe it's been 6 months. Is that Thrive? How long have you been there?
Just over a year, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Wow. So my memory, it's
fine.
awful.
I know.
Anyway, is there anything that, having recently been through this experience, I mean, I know you've done this before, but like, you watched, oh, wow, this is how things go wrong. This is where things could be great. Did you kind of bring some early questions and priorities into Thrive? Like, this is how now I want to run an engineering team because I know how much it matters.
Yeah. I mean, eBay has 4,000 engineers and my organization at Thrive is 100. So it's a substantially different scale. Mm-hmm. And also the reason why I joined Thrive is it's the late stage private, knock wood, hopefully about to be public company if the markets will allow. We'll see. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, all the techniques that I mentioned are the techniques, which is do the value stream map or the equivalent, like look and see how long things take and how long you're waiting. And then this just constant like conversation between the platform enabler teams and the and the teams that consume that stuff, and just be constantly in communication, and just make things better. And, how does anything get better in the world? It's not by typically doing some massive thing that we think through ahead of time and we execute for 5 years. It's instead, we have this goal that we want to achieve and we iterate our way toward the goal, right? It's the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, act. What's one step, or the improvement kata equivalently, same idea, where what's one step forward that I think might get me closer to my goal? Try that step, evaluate where we are. If it looked good, let's keep doing more of that or something else. If it didn't work good, let's back up and go the other direction. Like, that's the only way things get sustainably better, is some kind of continuous improvement cycle. And yeah, I relearned that again by this experience at eBay.
I love that. Relearned. I feel like I keep saying, we keep learning this lesson over and over. And then I'm like, are we learning it? If we're learning, but it's different contexts. It's different. Just like bringing that in as a priority, I think is huge. All right, I'm going to go rapid fire on these 3 rituals. I gave the spiel already on rituals. So number 1, a ritual to ensure that you're refocusing on the needs of your customers and customer problems. Yeah,
at eBay, it was, we did a weekly meeting with each of the individual teams. So it was pretty big investment on executive time, but it was totally worth it, because we would sit them with their part of the dashboard and go, okay, here's the improvements that we've made so far. Here's where we're lagging. Here are some opportunities. And just like it's a feedback loop, just constantly having a feedback loop with the customer teams. Got it.
Have the conversation weekly. Love it. Okay. One ritual to create the right organizational conditions for success.
I will specifically talk about the executive cover for people making these platformy, not producty, kinds of improvements. And so the ritual there is, we did it monthly, but like regular updates to my broader executive peers about, hey, and calling out in a good way what teams are doing well. Like, hey, this team over here in buyer experience, they're doing awesome. They, and just having a constant steady state of displaying and celebrating the wins and making it a thing that executives want to be a part of and want to enable their teams to do. Because again, no customer of eBay is like, could you guys please have better continuous integration? Like, nobody says nobody. Although they do say, why does it take so long for this particular feature to come out? Why is this thing still broken? So anyway.
Right. Yeah. Celebrating the wins, relaying the business impact, and doing that at executive level.
And making it both safe and encouraged for the peer executives who are humans too and have lots of other pressures that are beyond continuous delivery. So yeah.
All right. And I feel like you've talked about this a lot, but it's the recipe, one ritual to build a partnership with your customer.
Yeah. Camille used the embedding one. I use that, but I'll give you a different one. In addition to those weekly meetings with the individual teams, we had a weekly, we called it Scrum of Scrums, or maybe think of Team of Teams style meeting, where there was one representative from each of the teams that were part of the program, and we would just share wins. And we made it a safe space for people to say, hey, you know what, I'm struggling with this. Can I get some help? And other peer teams of theirs on the product side were like, oh, we solved that problem. We can come help you. Or the platform team would say, hey, we haven't solved that problem yet, but you want to be an alpha customer of us as we solve it, next week. And so again, staying tight with those teams in the sort of team of teams style, straight out of that book called Team of Teams. So yeah.
Excellent recommendation. Awesome. Randy, as always, a delight. Love to chat. And thank you for your time. Thanks for sharing these experiences with everybody. I think there's just a ton to take away.
When did you first know you were an engineer? At 6 years old, you took apart the family radio just to see how it worked. At 17, you wrote your first game because you knew you could. At your first job, you solved a problem in 8 hours that your team had lived with for 8 years. Your boss sent you a pizza. Last week, you prevented an incident that would have impacted millions globally. And outside of your team, no one will ever know. You started for fun. Now, customers rely on you and millions of dollars are on the line. but you see every new problem as an opportunity to try to learn. Because solving problems is what you do. You're an engineer. You're wired to be curious. You break a thing open to understand it. Then you rebuild it. Better. You've never been afraid to try and fail, as long as you're making things better as you go. You're an engineer. To those who were engineers before they even knew what an engineer was, we built this for you.
We have Raju Gandhi up next, who's going to allow me to stop talking and thinking for a minute by just talking us through an architect's guide to rethinking platforms as product. Very on point for the day. Raju is the founder of DefMacro software, which I'm just going to pause in the middle of the introduction to ask you a question. That sounds like a Clojure thing to me, but I'm curious what inspired that particular name, and then I'll get on with the rest of it.
Oh, so you are right on point. It's actually a Lisp and Clojure thing, and it's the twist on that name of the company is that a macro in Lisp or Clojure is some code that writes code. Mm-hmm. And the way I looked at it is, human DNA writing code, so it's code writing code. That was the sort of DefMacro name. Nobody ever gets it for what it's worth. You're the only one who's ever looked at me and said, "Oh, is that a Clojure thing?"
So CircleCI, fun fact, CircleCI primary language at the beginning was Clojure. So that's the source. I've been around this company for a really long time. But I'm actually glad we took that little vignette pause, because what I was about to tell you about Raju is that he spends a lot of time thinking, writing, teaching, explaining hard concepts, breaking them down and making them simple. And we just got a little sample, a little teaser for something that nobody here maybe knew about. I mean, probably some people had to do Lisp in college or whatever. I was just talking about dogs. It sounds like you have a few fuzzy friends at home or furry friends at home of your own. And you can find Raju blogging at looselytyped.com, and you live in, I'm introing Raju to Raju. Raju lives in Ohio, which he could have told you himself. Anyway, as I said, I'm going to duck out now, let you take over and share your thoughts on this. And I'll come back in to wrap up. If you have questions, we are going to take questions this portion as well. And I'm going to hold you to 3 rituals at the end to share with us on how you think about these things. But I'll pass it over to you and take us away.
Well, I appreciate it, Rob. I want to start by saying that if everyone can hear me, hopefully everyone can hear me. I want to start by saying that when O'Reilly reached out to me and said, "Hey, you want to come, talk about product thinking for platforms?" And I looked at the sort of list of speakers and I saw Camille's name, and I'm like, "You have Camille, like, why do you need me?" The other thing I wanted to mention is that I was listening in. I just missed about half an hour in the middle. And one thing I did note is a lot of what I'm going to say now has been in some form of fashion mentioned early on, which in a way is good because it reinforces where I'm coming from. And for you, maybe it's a little bit repetitive, but what I'm hoping it does is it tells you that a lot of what Rob and Camille and Randy have been talking about are right on point, right? Now, the way I sort of carved out this portion of the talk was to come at it from an architect's perspective. So I am a developer. I've been in this industry for 25 years. I do design. I do software architecture. I am now in the developer experience / platform engineering space. And I have zero sort of product background. I wouldn't know a product roadmap if it came and slapped me in the face. So that's one angle that I came at this from, because that is my backdrop. The other angle I came at this from was, what do you need to know if you were embarking on a platform sort of engineering effort within your organization, say starting today, right? And those are the 2 vectors that I'm hoping to zone in on as we go through the next 30 or 35 minutes. As I said, I'm coming at this from a building the platform perspective. So you're sort of embarking on the journey. What do you need to know about? And this is something actually that Rob mentioned right at the very beginning of our session together today, which is that you are dealing with internal customers. And he said a couple of things that caught my ear and maybe one or two things that I didn't quite align with my experiences. So let me explain what I mean. The thing to remember is that when we talk about platforms, there is a certain level of confusion, right? That confusion comes from the word platform. If you read a lot of the literature that's out there, whether that's on the ThoughtWorks blog, whether you read it in Camille's book, whether you read it on like the Kubernetes as a platform, right? Or the CNCF white papers, it's very confusing. What does the term platform actually mean? Because when you think about it, Kubernetes is a platform, CircleCI is a platform, GitHub is a platform, Jenkins is a platform. So what does it mean to do platform engineering? And the way I've tried to sell it is that it's actually not really platform engineering, it's engineering on top of platforms. In other words, you're trying to build something that creates a smooth narrative across the various platforms employed by the enterprise in order to make the lives of your engineers productive, happier, more satisfactory, and the end result being better business outcomes, right? So with that backdrop, the first thing you're going to hit is that you are primarily dealing with internal customers. One term that you're going to hear a lot in this space is the internal developer platform or the internal developer portal. Those are two different things. But the sort of caveat I have is the word developer, right? So I'm just going to call them internal customers. And this is something Rob said at the very beginning, right? You have a much smaller base. Randy, who was just here before this, talked about their experiences at eBay, said we had 4,000 engineers, and now they are working with an engineering team of 100. You might be in a bigger organization, right? 20,000 engineers, maybe 30,000 engineers. Doesn't matter. The point is that your customer, your actual customer base is much larger. And if you come from an organization that is product based, and what I mean by that is you actually produce a real product, as opposed to working for an organization that leverages technology to buttress another kind of business, right? If you think about insurance, education, healthcare, wealth management, banking, technology is at the forefront of all of these businesses today, but at the end of the day, they are buttressing some other line of work. And so the product side of those kinds of organizations sits on the other side, right? The business side of things. But if you work for a product company, that thing is part of your DNA. But regardless, true product development, has focus groups and they have pilot groups and all of that business where there's a lot of money spent on that piece. When you have a much smaller base of internal customers, maybe engineers, QE, performance engineers, maybe even your software security people, or even leadership. The problem there is that you don't have the machinery and you don't have the resources or the money to build out a lot of this sort of machinery to do true product engineering, right? And so that's sort of a caveat. The good news there is that they are closer to you, which is something Rob mentioned at the very beginning of this session. And so it's easy to get in touch with them as opposing to jumping through all these hoops. Something else that Camille also mentioned and Rob mentioned is that they are engineers. If the thing you are building doesn't work for them, they're just going to find a way around it, right? They think like you think. And so if you are short in any way, they will find a way around you. And so the mandate to deliver something that truly solves their problem is at a much higher level. The second caveat is that it is a captive audience, right? Now, there are situations where platforms that are internal are mandated, which I don't think is a good idea. But that said, even if they are captive, right, the idea that you want to do is that you want to help them alleviate their pain points, right? You want to reduce the cognitive load. You want to help them reduce the toil in their day-to-day work and help reduce the manual repetitive work. That said, if you have any murmurs of, oh, we'll just make it mandatory for everybody to use, push back. That is not how platform engineering teams typically work. Granted that there's money being put into this, granted that your leadership is going to be asking you questions about, well, why isn't anyone adopting this? But if no one's adopting it, that's because the platform isn't meeting the needs of its users, as opposed to forcing it down their throats and hoping that something will stick, right? So just push back on this notion that you can mandate the platform across the enterprise. Because remember, they are engineers. If you push something on them and they don't like it, they'll just find a way around it. The third one, this is the one that I always struggle with, because is as you are going through the discovery process, what are your pain points? Tell us where we can help you reduce the toil or help you reduce the cognitive load. They're going to come up with, sort of little things. Right? Can you fix this while you are at it? Or can you go do that little thing for me? And these are the people you hang out with, you work with regularly, you interface with regularly. You might even go and know them socially outside of the work culture. It's hard to say no to them. And that goes against the notion of a true product mentality, which is you're always prioritizing ruthlessly to figure out exactly what problems you're trying to solve because of two reasons. One, if you do Band-Aid work, what you end up with is essentially this pile of technical debt that is unmaintainable. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't make anyone's lives better. And you have limited resources. We've already talked about how a lot of these internal efforts often tend to be a little tighter in budgets. You're trying to sell to upper management and leadership that this could be useful, but they're not going to write you a $20 million check and say, yeah, go do whatever you want. They're going to say, show me value. And so if you keep doing Band-Aid work, you're not really solving it or not approaching it cohesively and not building a narrative that helps solve real problems. You're just sort of firefighting mode as opposed to strategizing. There's a lot of shadow IT that is potential here. They'll sidle up to you, sort of nudge you in the corner and say, hey, while you're working on that, go make this happen. And so then the question then is, do you have enough control in place to make sure that you're not deviating from the bigger plan? And then finally, it's a moving target. I think this is something Camille and Ian brought up in their book. I can't remember where I read this, but developers are a fastidious lot, right? Engineers are a fastidious lot. And this is true for humans, right? If you have a pain point today and you work around it 3 weeks from now or 3 months from now, you won't forget that was a pain point. You'll just focus on the next pain point. That's one part of the problem. The second part of the problem is that there is a lot of attrition in our industry. People are constantly moving projects, teams, portfolios, even companies. And so when someone new comes in, they're like, well, in my old organization, this was never a problem. I don't know why this is a problem here. Or they'll just focus on the things that you are not currently focusing on. And what I'm trying to say as a person leading a platform team, and I've led other kinds of platform teams in the past, it's very demoralizing to your team. It's like, man, this crowd is always complaining about something. Yeah, kind of the world we are treading in over here, right? So I'm trying to say that from your mental sort of sanity perspective, if you are the one part of a platform team, or you're the one leading the charge on a platform team, sort of get used to it, right? That you're always, yes, you will occasionally hear the big high five and say, yeah, man, you did it. This is really awesome. But 3 weeks from then, they'll have moved on to the next thing, right? That pain point is no longer a pain point. So they don't think about it. They don't remember it. And for the people who just walked into the organization, they didn't even know it existed. And so you're always trying to cater to a crowd that is rather hungry for more and more improvements. So talking about, this is a term, by the way, I love this term from Ian and Camille's book. They call it a curated product, which is a lovely word when you think about it. And what does that mean? And again, this is an analogy that Rob just mentioned, and I'm like, man, everyone is stealing my thunder today, which is the chef's analogy, right? If you think about your organization today, you have a bunch of primitives. And when you think about those primitives, they could be at different levels of abstraction. Kubernetes can be treated eventually like a primitive. You can treat Jira or your ticketing system, your dashboarding tool, your observability tool as a set of primitives. And yeah, as an engineer, I can stitch together something that makes it easy for me to go from tool to tool, or be able to go from one tool and push something into another tool. I can do that, right? I can build a patchwork of things. But as an engineer, what do I want? What I want is this notion of, give me a well-formed, well-defined, the term that Rob just used was a paved path. And I don't want to think about it. Like if I wanted to cook, I would sit at home and cook. Like there's no reason for me to come to you, the restaurant, the platform team, for anything if the thing you're serving me does not meet the needs that I have, right? Give me something balanced, give me something nutritious, give me something tasty. In this case, apparently, give me something that is visually appealing, right? The UI, UX part of it that I can consume off the bat, right? I don't want to be wrangling primitives. What I want to be doing is saying, give me a meal that's well prepared, thought out, nutritious, and that I can just consume as I want. And so, as a platform team, your job is not to code the primitives. Your job is to build the interface that gets your customer, the engineering teams, that balanced, nutritious dish ready to go. In other words, what you're offering them is a pantry or a menu of things that they can pick off the shelf when they want to, what they are hungry for, what they need, and be able to get on with their lives, right? If they were going to be wrangling the primitives, they don't need you. They'll just work around you and do what they have to, right? This is the famous Henry Ford quote, and it goes back to this notion of thinking about platforms. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. You can't talk to people and tell them, what are your problems? Here's a great example from this great article called The Feature Trap. Some people call it, but anyways, this is a problem that developers have. My backdrop and a lot of the teams I've worked with tend to be feature-driven teams, right? Here's a ticket, go make it happen. Here's a ticket, go make it happen. And I've never sat back and thought about the holistic view. Here's a great description. And again, I don't know about any of you, but what is a G-Sync, FreeSync, Game Optimizer, HGIG? I have no idea. But what happened here most likely is an engineering team was given a bunch of features and said, go slap all of this together in some nice TV box and ship it out. And by the way, slap a description on it while you're at it. This is the feature trap, where the only thing you're doing is punching out features. And the problem here is that most of the times, you're not going to build a cohesive narrative. What you're going to do is just slap together a bunch of features and hope that it's compelling. In fact, what's funny is that for this very same product, and by the way, I had to Google this around to find the reviews for this product. If you look at the reviews, the customers are telling you what they care about. They care about the fact that I love the big picture, or the picture quality, or that the fact that the customer service is terrible. This is the thing they want you to sell them, right? They don't want HEIG, FreeSync, blah, blah, blah. Sure, those are all the necessary details I might choose to look into after I'm debating between one or two products. But at a high level, this is what I want. Like, tell me it's a 72-inch, OLED screen that has internet-enabled all streaming services capable TV. That's what I want. I want a cohesive narrative. I don't want little bits of trivia information that for 90% of the audience doesn't make any sense, right? So be cognizant of what it means to actually build out a good product. So what you need to do, we've already talked about shadowing and embedding teams. You need to see how they use the systems that they're already leveraging. How do they work with Jenkins? How do they work with Kubernetes? What are the pain points? Rob mentioned earlier, you get Kubernetes enabled applications in this, and you're like, here's a big Helm chart, go figure it out. Well, that's a pain point. I don't know what a Helm chart is. YAML, I don't wrangle this stuff. See how they use the system and then figure out how can you smooth that path, right? And this is where like good product ownership, good product management actually comes into play. As you progress through this process of iterating with teams, you can start thinking, okay, we need a product owner, somebody who can build out that product roadmap, who can help us triage, prioritize, and lay out the foundational pieces that make this happen. So there are a couple of points here that I quickly want to make. So I already mentioned that this thing has to be optional, right? You cannot mandate it. I already mentioned the word compelling or curated, which is a steal straight from Camille and Ian's book on platform engineering. Every platform that you build has to evolve over time, and its primary purpose should be to simplify things for its user. Think of any product sitting on your desk right now. Any product, your phone, your shoes, your water bottle. It simplifies your life in some form or fashion, right? The minute you find a product that takes more energy from you than it gives back, you're going to find an alternative, right? That is the vision. The minute you start telling your users, well, you need to click this button here and then do that thing over there and then do this thing over here, you've not simplified their life. You've just made it harder, right? If they have to think about all of that, there's no reason for them to use your platform. They'll just go do what they were doing before you came along. And again, how do you know what to build? You need, the nice thing about having that small internal base is that you have the ability to talk to them very regularly. Now, I know some of you threw up a little bit when I used the word survey. I'm sure many of you work for organizations where you get like a survey in your email every other day. Oh, you took this training. Please tell us the survey. You talk to HR. Please fill this survey. Every time you turn around, there's a survey to fill out. It's very easy to get into that mode. Well, we'll just send out a survey and then we'll see what the feedback is. It works, but it doesn't really work. You can get a broader reach, but normally the numbers you get back from surveys tend to suffer. You can have focus groups. This is again something that Randy brought up, or champions, as many people refer to them. Shadowing is great, or the embedding model is great. But whatever you do, feedback, no matter what it takes, if you have to have a touch point with teams on a weekly basis, you need enough metrics built into the platform so that you know what is the usage, what are the features that are being used more than the others. When you do shadowing, watch them as they use the platform, right? See where they tend to get confused, where they get stuck. Iterate, fix, try again. But you need this kind of feedback. You cannot sit in an ivory tower and figure out what people's problems are. That never works. You have to be on the ground with them trying to figure this out. And I know that's hard because you are all busy. And if you're trying to pilot a platform engineering team within your organization, it's probably one more thing on your plate. It's not like someone's going to walk up to you and say, all right, well, now you're going to work on this full time. That very rarely happens. It's kind of like, well, you have 30 other things to do, but if you want to really start this platform engineering effort, you can do it. We'll give you some money for it. We'll give you a couple of resources for it. But it's kind of a effort that we'll see where it goes. So But it's hard to find time to shadow teams, work with them, maybe embed yourself with them, but you gotta find the time. One thing that I loved, and this was already mentioned by Randy, the Accelerate book was written by Nicole Forsgren. She also has pioneered this new framework for developer experience. And I highly recommend you look it up. It's the new DevX framework. You can just Google it, Nicole Forsgren, DevX, and you'll find this picture. But what's more important from a platform engineering perspective, given that part of platform engineering is to improve the developer experience, or engineer experience, if you like to call it that, is they give you a couple of sample metrics in their paper. And so this is something else that you can start to measure as you start to ramp up your platform engineering efforts. Like, what metrics can we draw out of this paper, or sort of twist and turn to our own advantage and start measuring. So we can see whether it's actually changing anything significantly, or do we need to pivot and do something else? Empathy is something that I cannot speak enough of. It's very hard for engineers to be empathetic because we are engineers. We are used to, twiddling bits on hard drives to get what we want done. And it's very easy to tell your customers, well, you're the one who's doing it wrong. Why didn't you do this before you did that? Well, if it's not obvious, you can't blame the customer. That's the problem of the platform. You didn't get the platform right. Empathy, and you need to practice this on a daily basis, day in and day out with your customers, because that feedback you're getting, whether it's a survey or shadowing or just any kind of feedback, you need to be able to understand that, one, they are trying to tell you what their problems are. And you can't start telling them, well, if you had only done this and that, this wouldn't be a problem. Well, sure, but then what value are you providing, right? So it's very easy for us engineers to jump to solutioning, like, well, let's do this and let's do that. And then you realize that the platform should have already subsumed this as part of its offering, right? The user shouldn't have to jump through hoops. Your job is to provide that paved path on top of other things. You don't know what you don't know, right? And it's okay that you don't know. The whole point of feedback, the whole point of the discovery process, the whole point of shadowing or embedding is it's okay. It's okay to not know. We're all learning together, but that's part of the empathy model, is to be able to relate and sort of bridge that pain point together, right? We're all in this journey together. If you don't build something compelling, they will leave. I think I've beaten this horse quite dead. And then one thing I'll mention is that there's a big flux of this notion of internal developer portals that has emerged. The nice thing about using one of these, and I won't get into the build and buy versus thing, is that they eliminate the UI UX perspective. And so I highly encourage you, if you are building one of these sort of internal developer platforms, look at one of these commercial offerings like Backstage or Port or Cortex or whoever you want to pick as the front end, because trying to build a good UI is very important to DevX, right? To developer experience. And I know I don't have the chops for it, but they do. So, just use something off the shelf to front your platform's effort and give them a nice cohesive window to look at. Talked about this. All right. So very quickly, just because you build it, they're not going to come. You got to convince them, you got to work with them, and you got to improve their lives. Your job is not to improve the platform. That's a side effect. Your job is to improve the lives of your users. If you fail in that, you're going to lose that customer. You can't, like I said, you can't do patchwork. You have to prioritize ruthlessly. Yes, they are your friends, but sometimes you gotta just dismiss one of their concerns because it doesn't fit your current roadmap. That doesn't mean it doesn't come in the future, but today it's not a priority for you. Everything has to be prioritized ruthlessly. You need very, very good project management skills. Mention this, don't make it a mandate. It's always optional. That is the world you live in. And as long as you live in that world, you'll be forced to do a better job, right? As a person providing the platform. The minute you start thinking, ooh, this is mandatory, you can start resting on your laurels. And that's a mistake. That is where you will fail. And then finally, good platforms evolve. So let's say that you are building a platform that allows teams to quickly build out CI/CD pipelines and deploy on Kubernetes clusters. Maybe today you need to build some glue code to make a gateway happen in Kubernetes or provide some functionality. Well, tomorrow maybe Kubernetes will provide you that functionality. Then don't be married to your stuff. Dismiss your stuff, reach into the platform that you're sitting on top of and subsume it, right? So a platform sits between the users and the things underneath it. And what you want to do is the minute the thing underneath you rises or raises the watermark, you need to be able to say, okay, we wrote this stuff, it kind of worked, but now the thing we are relying on actually does it for us. So we are going to throw away our stuff and just use that directly. And that's okay. Good platforms evolve. That is the one piece that I constantly battle with developers for, right? And I think that's all I had. So I'm going to stop talking. I know I blazed through a whole bunch of material, but hopefully it reinforced a lot of what Rob and Camille and Randy have been talking about.
Perfect timing. Well, thank you, Raju. I totally agree. Hearing these things from different perspectives, I hope, is helpful for folks to validate and sort of internalize. I think you did a great job of, one thing, I love the fireside chat format, but sometimes it goes all over the place, and sort of taking that and putting it together into a clear layout was super helpful. There are a couple questions. I'm going to maybe slide them into my chat with Teresa because I think they'll transfer nicely, but I don't want to move on without the opportunity to ask you about some rituals, which I've been doing for everyone today, along my 3 themes. So I'll start with the first one. Can you tell me about a ritual that you have to refocus teams on customer problems?
My usual approach is dog fooding. You need to use the platform daily. And even if it is just running a proof of concept or running an experiment, you need to use the platform yourself to do work. And so dog food your way, and then you will start to realize where the rough edges are. So that's one way to do it.
Well, that's super handy because that was actually that was one of the questions, was whether people should do this. And I think it's absolutely right. Awesome. So a ritual to create the right organizational conditions for success.
This is a tricky one because you're playing a political landmine of the people who are paying for this are not the people who are using it. And so you have that sort of dichotomy between priorities. Ideally, what you want is to be able to have the people you are serving find a dotted line of communication to the people who are paying for this thing. In other words, your stakeholders. And so what that does is rather than you tooting your own horn, your customers are tooting your horn for you. And you get that buttressing effect from leadership that says, hey, sounds like you guys are actually delivering. Here's more money. And it's encouraging to the people working on the platform itself because you don't have to go out of your way to sell something to leadership, right? Your job is to sell it to your customers, not to leadership. Leadership comes around and says, hey, good job. Here's more money or here's more resources. Keep doing what you're doing. And I think that's I know Randy had a similar thing. I'm not going to repeat what Randy said. I liked Randy's answer, but I'll just add to that answer.
Perfect. Well, I mean, it's not terrible if we're building on each other's ideas. It'd be a little more confusing for folks if we're like, it's totally wrong. Don't do that. All right. And then to wrap it up, a ritual to build a partnership with your customer. In other words, the product teams.
So one thing that's worked for me in previous experiences is basically very close to what Randy said is I've always called them the champions group, which is a bunch of folks from different pilot teams coming together at a round table Once every 2 weeks is generally the frequency I've found. Anything more than that, no one shows up, and anything less than that, and people lose interest. Every 2 weeks, a roundtable of the champions. Like Randy said, help each other out, but also be able to say, oh, you must have missed, this part of the change log, or maybe you didn't notice that this feature landed. Let me show you how to do it. And so they grassroots their own way through improving things. And it works really well, especially at the initial onset of a platform engineering effort. Hopefully soon after that, the teams are sort of trying to find ways to collaborate with each other. But initially that champions group really works.
All right, I'm going to move on to bring it home now with Teresa Torres. And by way of quick intro, I keep joking that I have everything on my desk. So Teresa is the author of Continuous Discovery Habits. You have way more copies of it, obviously, than I do, and probably in 7 different languages behind you. I'm not totally sure. I will say mine doesn't look very beat up, and I feel bad about that. But the reality is I listened to it on Audible. That's how I actually heard it. And you read it, right? So I have these weird relationships with authors where I feel like I've spent hours with them, but they don't even know who I am, which I don't know if other people have said that to you before, but it's kind of a weird thing. Anyway, so Teresa is author of this book. We're going to get into some of the pieces of that. I think honestly, after I finished my 3rd Marty Kagan book, Audible was like, oh, you clearly like product books. Maybe you'd like this book. That's how I discovered it. But I'm happy to tell the world about it because it was a game changer for me. I learned so much from reading that book. Also run courses, which we know at CircleCI, because we just actually sent one of our teams through one of Teresa's team's courses, and they came away with amazing feedback, learning about how to test assumptions. And according to my notes, have taught over 16,000 I don't even know how to think about that. Product people, stuff about products. So anyway, we've been talking all day about product thinking for platform teams. We've taken a lot of that perspective from people who have experience on platform teams, but I feel like we're all kind of playing at being product people on TV, if that makes sense. And so I'm super excited to wrap this all up. And have you kind of, land it all with some very specific, this is how you product, for those of us who have just been saying it would be great if we were better at this. So thanks so much for joining me, Teresa. I'm so excited for this.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dig in. I wasn't able to be here for the whole event, but the little bit that I just caught, I'm so excited to hear developers embrace this and want to get better at it.
Yeah, well, you should be proud. We're all trying, but we also know it's hard, right? I think a lot of what platform teams generally have an internal customer, and I'm gonna skip the intro for a second and get straight into this piece, which I'm super excited about, and then we'll come back to sort of a bit about the book and why you wrote it. But there's this really interesting dynamic where your customers, like platform engineers, are like, hey, I'm an engineer. I know what engineers need. So I'll just build the thing that I know they need. And then the customer is also an engineer, is like, I could just build it myself. I don't know why I'm waiting for this provider to build me that thing. So like that dynamic is really interesting and feels novel compared to some other maybe product explorations that people might do in a more consumer. I'm building a social network. I'm building whatever I'm building. Does that feel different as you've worked with teams that are trying to build this sort of stuff? I know that you've been working on sort of APIs and more structured stuff lately. Like, is that a dynamic that really changes it, or is it just like, hey, think about the fundamentals and you can be great at this no matter what your customer is?
I think all of us, and by all of us, I mean all humans, it's really easy to fall into the trap of like, the way I think about the world is how everybody else thinks about the world. And therefore, like, I don't need to go talk to other people. Like, this is a very universal thing. I think with platform products of like, I'm a developer, I'm building for other developers, it's even easier to think that, like, oh, my customers are just like me. But I think it's not that different for developers. Like, I think all product teams suffer from this. And I think what we forget is even when your customer is just like you, they don't have the depth of product knowledge about your product that you do. And so you're still going to make decisions that don't make any sense to your customer. Even if like you had a twin that thought exactly like you and had all the same skills you had, you don't have the same knowledge about your product. And so there's still going to be this gap. And what I always tell developers is I don't think I've ever met a developer who didn't at one point have a frustration with like they were using a new API or a new SDK and they were just trying to figure it out and it was poorly documented and it was confusing and they used different names in the main product as they did in the API and they had to hold these like different mental models in their head and it took forever to learn. And again, the documentation was wrong because we encounter that all the time. And it turns out that was built by developers for developers, but there's still a gap, right? Because we all know, like when we write code, we hold so much context in our head. Our customers don't have that context. Like we have to expose it to them.
Mm-hmm. I love that. All right, now I'm going to go back to what I was actually going to start out asking you about, which is I joked about, listening to Audible and listening to all these books. And I'm super curious, like the motivation, like, there's lots of content out there that covers kind of high level principles, organizational structures, how to design teams around product and design and engineering, et cetera. And was there a specific gap that you felt like, and I use the word canon, it just makes me really happy that I know that word, but like in the literature, which is probably like tweets and blog posts these days, on discovery, like really how to get into the mechanics and be really great at that? Like, what was it that drove you in that specific direction, a realization that maybe this is the one thing that people really just don't know how to do? Or was it just a personal passion? Like, what was it that got you so focused on discovery specifically?
I think like before the book, what got me focused on discovery is, to me, it's the fun part of product. I mean, it's always been fun for me to engage with customers and learn about their needs. And like, even if you don't like talking to customers, which I get, like there's a little bit of this, I've never done this thing, there's some fear. I think we all of us that make things, like we get this joy out of seeing another human get value out of the thing that we made. And I think that like to be able to learn about how do we make that joyful moment happen more and more often. I think like that's why we create things. Like sometimes we create things just for ourselves, but I think a lot of times we get this like exponential return when we see like, oh, this was a thing that somebody else could use. And so for me, it started with just like learning about what people need and like how to better match a solution to that need. Just came out of my own personal like passion. But I also like with the book in particular, a lot of people write about this stuff, but they write about it from this like 30,000 foot view. So like Inspired is an amazing book. And like, if you read Inspired, like everybody wants that job, but that job doesn't really exist because companies don't know how to do this. And Inspired doesn't teach you how to do it. It tells you what good looks like. It doesn't tell you how to get there. And that was a gap I saw. And I worked with a lot of product teams and I was just like, oh, people just don't know how to do this. So my goal with the book was literally to write the like on the ground pragmatic guide for like, okay, what do I do today?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited because we were talking about rituals all day. And that's exactly the point of rituals. Like, cool, we want to be that, but how would we know that we are being that? Like, what is the thing? So we'll come back to that. Just a little foreshadowing, I guess. Okay, so we're talking about the general and then what's interesting about platform. We've been talking a little bit about APIs also. I think it's a great example. Like, these are things that are a little harder to change than some other products. Like people get sad when Facebook moves the ticker or something, right? But you don't need to relearn the product. You don't need to go and change a bunch of your other tools to work with that, right? Like you build a platform and then all of your engineers build on top of that platform. Now you change the platform, they have to rebuild everything, or you have to do version management, whatever. So are there different tools or approaches or maybe like a subset of what you think about in discovery that applies more to things you're building that have that high cost of change?
Yes, definitely. So I'm actually, this event is at exactly the right time because I'm in the middle of publishing a 5-part series about discovery around API teams. And it's specific to APIs, but it could be broadly applied to platform teams, regardless of how you're like integrating with your product teams. But what really inspired me around this is that one, I see a lot of teams just not doing this work. They're not building in those customer feedback loops, and their customers are in the building. Like it's easy to build in those customer feedback loops, But I think, Rob, to your point, like this is exactly right. Like it's so costly to not do this work. And like what really motivated me to get interested in this actually came from my personal experience coding. Like I went over the last couple of years, started using a lot more APIs. And when I started, I didn't even know the ins and outs of REST. Like I was a beginner. And I was just blown away by like how complicated things are, how people don't follow standards, like how confusing everything was. And like some of it is because I was a beginner, but like I wasn't a beginner coder. I just haven't written code in 20 years. So I wasn't up on the current stuff. And I realized that like with a product that's hard to change, like when you have to version something to make a change, you really need to make sure that you're making good decisions. And so like what I would say is different is when you're putting out a V1 of a SDK or an API or whatever it is, I think you probably need to do more upfront discovery than you would do if you were a regular product team just building a feature. But I think you still need continuous discovery because as I've dug into this topic and I've talked to a ton of engineers about this, some of the biggest problems are not around your endpoints or what you're making, the functionality you're making available. There are challenges with that for sure, and you want to get that right. But so many of the challenges are around the documentation. And that's something we can continuously improve, right? So there is this like big step function of like we're releasing a version and you do want to do a lot of discovery and make sure you're making the right decisions there. But we can also fix a lot of problems by just making better documentation.
That's super interesting. Like the product, I guess the platform, if we just think of platform as like I'll call it interfaces. Sometimes it's API like REST, sometimes it's other tooling, whatever, the SDK. That's not the complete product that you are offering to your customers, right? It's the tooling, it's the installer, it's the documentation, as you highlighted. And you could change those things without requiring a lot of change from your customers and make their lives much, much better. Yeah, so that's a great insight. Now I wanted to ask you about the platform teams and their like, how they think they're the customer, but I guess we already covered that. So, yeah, I mean, you use the same expression like in the building, right? The customers in the building, it should be super easy to get those touch points. You talk a lot about like at least weekly talking to your customers. Are there unique challenges that keep us from doing that? Like it just feels so obvious when we say it out loud, like they're sitting next to you, you have lunch with them. Like how hard could it be to get their feedback, but we still don't do it very well. What are some of the hangups? Like what are some of the things that keep us? Is it that we don't know how to get the feedback? Are we afraid? Like what kind of gets in people's way that you see?
I think some of it is as simple as it's just not the norm, right? Like engineers don't learn this stuff. Like where do you get exposed to like, hey, go talk to a customer? That's typically somebody else's job in the organization. But I think when you're a developer and you're building for other developers, it turns out we already know how to get the feedback we need. I'm going to tell you the simplest way to get feedback on platform products. Go pair program with your customer. Forget interviewing. You don't need to know how to interview because you can ask them questions and you're not going to get what you need. Like you want to see their code. Pair program with them. Share a screen. Look at what they're doing. Look as they read through your documentation. Look as they use your installer. Look as they try to learn your SDK calls or your API calls. If it's someone brand new, like they're integrating your platform service for the first time, you're going to be blown away by what is hard for them. Like they're going from 0 to 1 with like, how do I even understand what you're making available to me? And it's hard. You know it's hard because you use SDKs and APIs, right? Like you already know that like just getting started is so much friction. And then for your people that have been using it for a long time, you want to go pair program with someone whenever they have to touch your product. Like, okay, I implemented this a year ago and now there's a bug and I got to go back and I got to look at the code. We all know this experience of like, oh, I haven't looked at this in a year and I got to go trace through all the code and I got to look at what's where and how do I even tackle this? And it's why we hate those stupid little bugs in the parts of the system that we haven't looked at in forever. Like, yeah, it might be easy to fix once you have all the context in your head, right? Well, part of this is the design of our products. Like, how do we make it as easy as possible so the context that they're putting in their head already matches what's in their head. So when they go and they look at their code from a year ago, it just makes sense to them. So I don't want people to just do the beginning of using the service. I want them to look at all the moments where an engineer has to return to that moment and use it again.
Yeah, we embedding, quote unquote, has come up a number of times today. And I think one of the things that folks confuse, I'm not saying today, but generally about that is kind of to your point of pair programming. I'm going to go sit with you to ramp you up on how to use the thing, as opposed to watch you completely fail and realize that the thing shouldn't be built the way that it's built right now, right? Like it's not a one-way. Like we sell a platform to some degree, like we're a CI/CD platform, right? So we have engineers sitting in customer research, user research back rooms, sort of we're watching videos later, and you get that exact same thing, which is this cringe of like, oh my goodness, did we really make them go through that, right? My goodness, we could be better. And they're not sitting with them, like trying to teach them, but really that insight back of like, oh, wow, that's the problem you're trying to solve. Oh, we made it harder. We didn't make it easier for you.
This is maybe where pair programming is the wrong word. Because like when we pair program, we work together to solve the problem. I don't want you actually helping the person, which is going to be weird. Like you have to communicate to your colleague. Like I'm here to watch you because I want to see where you get stuck. And then at the end, like after a short period of time, you can do this for like 20 minutes. Then you can stop and help them because they are your colleague and you want them to successfully use your product or service. But you have to give space to let that friction emerge and see what they struggle with. And because they're your colleague, you have to explain, like, that's the goal. Like, I know things are going to be hard. I don't want you to be embarrassed by it. Do think out loud. Like, as you're reading the documentation, tell me what you think. Tell me what's confusing. As you're writing code, like, and then what's going to be hard for the engineer on the platform team is they have to shut up. They have to just watch. Right? And so the part where it's like pair programming is you're looking at the same screen, but one person is doing the work and the other person is just reminding them like, hey, remember, tell me what you're doing. Think out loud. Tell me what's confusing. And it's going to be painful. And I think this is partly why we don't do it, is it is painful. Like you use the word cringe, like it's cringeworthy to be like, oh, I thought that language was so clear and it's not at all. But it's how our products get better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like exactly that, sort of sitting back. And I mean, I happen to be a parent, so I'm thinking about the parental instinct, like we talk about this all the time, like stepping in and keeping your kid from doing a thing. It's like, just let them more so they can learn. In this case, it's so you can learn, like watch the failure happen and then just say, oh, okay, take notes. So that seemed really hard, like when I tell this story all the time internally at CircleCI, but when I first joined the company, which is over 10 years ago, our support channel was just the engineers doing public support for our customers. And it was just like constant customer research, right? People would show up and say, hey, I can't do this. I can't do this. And we were like, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, no, I see how that's really hard. Like it was like this all day long. And it was one of the things that I think, it's hard to do at scale for sure, but it's something that builds a ton of that customer empathy where you really watch and see and like understand, oh, wait, yeah, that's what you're trying to do. Okay. I think I can try to solve that for you. So one of the things that you spent a lot of time talking about, both in the book, but just generally is assumptions, right? First, just even surfacing them. We've already talked about engineers thinking they already know, and you're saying everybody thinks they already know the customer they're trying to serve. So just surfacing them and then validating them, right? Testing whether you're right about your assumptions or not. It seems like a dumb question, but is it hard to get people to see that? Like why is it such a focus point, I guess? Why is it so important? And what's the struggle to get people there?
Yeah. So I'll talk about it. Yes, it is hard to get people to see their assumptions because they tend to think like in really giant assumptions. People want this endpoint. People want this. They want an SDK. Like the assumption is in the wrong scope. So partly what makes seeing assumptions hard is we don't know how to get specific enough. They feel so true to us, we don't even think we need to examine them. But actually, I want to go back just for a second, Rob, because I want to make something really tangible for people. Because I know there was this concept of like shadow people and bed with people. Let's make this teeny tiny. One time a week, watch somebody for 15 or 20 minutes using your product or service. And here's how I would do this. I would put in logging into my service so that I could see which of my colleagues were pinging it. And when I saw someone using it, I would send them a message on Slack or Teams or whatever you use and just be like, hey, can I come over and see what you're doing? Done. Once a week, right? Just like, we don't have to turn this into a big project. Like the smallest thing you can possibly think about doing. Okay, assumption testing. So in the like feature world, I'm building a feature in a GUI. The way that I teach teams to surface assumptions is I tell them to story map it. Forget the name story map because it's actually used for a different purpose. We're going to create a user journey of like, what are the steps a customer does to use the feature? So like if I'm creating a group on Facebook, it's like I'm going to Facebook, I'm looking for the groups, I'm clicking create group, I'm typing in all the stuff I need. It's just like a simple map of what is the customer doing. And then the value of that is you can go step by step and say what needs to be true in order for my customer to take that step. And that's what's going to get us really specific assumptions. So like I can't create a group if I can't find where groups are in the Facebook interface. I can't create a group if I'm not sure what to put in for the description, right? There's all these friction moments. Okay, so how does this work with platform teams? Like no matter what you're building on a platform team, how does my product team know there's a service for this? There's already this like awareness of like, how do they know this exists and they could be using it? Okay, great. That's probably the first step in every single platform team story map. Next is like, how do they learn about what's available, what's possible, right? So how do I learn about like what, and then there's sort of the nuts and bolts of like, how do I use it, right? So that's like the onboarding flow of like, how do I even know it exists? How do I learn about it? How do I get into the how of doing it? Okay, now I got to implement it. There's probably a different story map for like, I need to return to this. That story map is probably like something triggered. I got to go look at that code. How do I get all the context in my head? How do I figure out what I should be looking at? Right? So we can go step by step. And the value of doing this is you start to think like your customer. You start to remember like, oh yeah, getting the context for old code is hard. And also you start to think about the use cases in which they're going to use your platform or service. And I'll give an example of this. So one of the stories I shared in our most recent blog post was I run a training business. So we have a course platform and I use that course platform API extensively to automate a lot of my like business logic. They have an endpoint where I can get a course and I can update things about the course. I can update the title. I can update the price. One of the things I can update is I can close enrollment on the course. Okay, great. I need to do that because I limit seats in my course when they sell out. I check the number of seats sold. When I hit my limit, I close enrollment on the course. I encountered this weird bug where like I can't close enrollment on a paid course. Like when I did, it wiped out the price and it was no longer a paid course. Okay, here's why this bug occurred. This platform supports free courses and paid courses. They overloaded the access setting free versus paid with enrollment closed. A course can't be paid and enrollment closed. So as soon as I change it to enrollment closed, they wipe out the price. This is a problem because now if I need to reopen enrollment, it might be a free course. They never thought through this use case. Someone might have a paid course where they limit enrollment and later they need to close enrollment. Okay, this is a really specific use case to my business, but it's not that crazy if you just think about those 4 variables of like paid, free, enrollment closed. There's a 4th one we didn't talk about. It doesn't matter. They didn't think about like all the combined use cases. They didn't generate all the possibilities and it didn't work as expected in one of those use cases. When you go and watch your customer use your platform or service, you see them use it in surprising ways that you never thought of. And now you have to think about like, oh, does it even work for that use case? We never anticipated that. That's what we get from this. And this is also what you're going to get. Like we can story map these use cases. We can be like, oh, how are people going to integrate this part of the service? They're going to do this, 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 and this. What if they do this other thing? And now you can start to look through all the permutations of your like different parameters and how does it work? And does it break our assumptions? So this story mapping is just like, I'm going to think about this the way my customer does, uncover so much that's hard to predict from the get-go.
I mean, I love that. I'm also terrified by it. But like, does the thing do what we expected it to do, which is kind of that case, right? Like there's this, I won't say obvious because it wasn't obvious, but like a straightforward set of combinations of actions that people might take, and it breaks under some of those, what is probably expected behavior. And then there's kind of what you said before, like you'll see someone do something that you never anticipated, and that gives you new directions to go, oh, people are trying to do this. Oh, multiple people are trying to do this. That gives us a new opportunity as well, which I don't even know. I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I think I'm going to try to make this work because it's so like the other thing that blew my mind and really changed the way I look at things is your concept of opportunity solution tree, right?
Yeah.
And so opportunity, sure, big, and you talked about big overarching assumptions, big overarching opportunities, right? But taking that and then breaking it down. Well, I guess I should probably let you speak about it. Like, do you have a 30-second version of what an opportunity solution tree is, just so people know what we're talking about, so we can then ask questions?
Yeah, so this is designed to help teams that are focused on outcomes, right? So historically, we've been focused on outputs, like build this thing, build a service that does X. Okay, well, we don't actually get value when we build a service that does X. We get value when somebody uses your service that does X. So the output is building the service that does X. The outcome is usage of that thing, and really successful usage of that thing. Now, there's lots of types of outcomes. That's just one example. So when we ask a team, don't just build this thing, you have to like get to the outcome. Now it's a different problem. Like building a thing is, well, it used to be deterministic. It's still mostly deterministic. We're going to ignore LLMs for a minute, right? Like it's deterministic. We write code, we build an output, we ship it, we're done. But when we're looking at outcomes, it takes a lot more iteration. It takes a lot more like, we built a thing, nobody used it, why? We got to go learn why. Okay, now we got to iterate on the thing we built so people will use it. That's a much more unstructured problem. And when we have unstructured problems, we need to go and talk to customers and learn from them and like uncover why they're not using it. So the opportunity solution tree is a way to capture all the things we're learning from our customers about why we're not reaching our outcome. Those are opportunities. And then we can look at how do we design solutions that address those opportunities so we know what to build that creates customer value and gets us to our outcome.
And I think maybe I misunderstood this, so you're about to tell me, but like the big takeaway for me was taking that at a higher level and then breaking it down. Okay, within that, there's this and this and this. Within that, there's this and this and this. And therefore, we get down to something that's small enough that we could conceivably work on it, but we know will have impact and teach us more about the overall opportunity. So I guess I'm super interested in how to think about that. Like if we take an example, right? Like platform high level goal, like we want to improve reliability. So we're we're preventing all these things. Like I think people get stuck there. They go, oh, reliability. Do you know what I mean? Like let's make everything more reliable. I don't know, SLOs kind of thing. But like, how do you take that then, or how would you help a team take that and really, break it down in that tree model to get to something really concrete and then decide which of those concrete things they should go pursue?
Okay, so reliability is a great outcome to talk through because what do most engineers do when they hear let's improve reliability? They either are facing a blank page and they're stuck, or they look at every single part of the system and they just pick something and they start working on it. Mm-hmm. What's missing? We don't know where our reliability issues are impacting customers. No part of our system is 100% reliable at all times in every situation. We could always make any component more reliable. Which ones should we make more reliable? The ones where it's impacting our customer. That requires we actually go talk to them and find out, like, how is reliability impacting you? Then we start to hear about customer needs and friction and pain points. We go, oh, okay, we don't have to fix 1,000 parts in our system. Let's just fix this one because it's responsible for 60% of our customers' pain points.
Yeah. Well, I want to agree that it's a great example, but it was my example. But I think that point, everything you just said totally resonates with me, right? Yeah. Like, oh, cool. Let's go improve performance or latency on this one endpoint that no one even cares about or whatever, right? Because it's over 3 seconds. It's like no one's using it, right?
They're using it in a context where they can wait 3 seconds, exactly. Right? Like that's fine.
Yeah. Love it. All right. Well, I'm going to have to find a way to bring this to a close. So I feel like you've already answered all these, but I've been asking this ritual question of everybody all day. I think my sense from talking so far is that you're into these. Like let's not just say we want to be good at something, but let's have really concrete ways to go do that thing. And now, if you're probably still going to have examples that you haven't used today, but so number one ritual to refocus on customer problems, something that we can all do that's going to make sure we're focused on customer problems and not just building stuff.
Yeah, we talked about this. One time per week, go watch a customer use your product or service.
Yeah, I love
15
the
minutes.
little like notification idea. Someone's using your service right now. That's amazing.
Yeah, go talk to them. They're in your building. Walk across the floor. Ping them on Slack.
I'm going to find a way to implement that. All right, one ritual to create the right organizational conditions for success as a platform team.
Ooh, this is a hard question. What's hard for platform teams is your customers are part of your organization, so they seem like they overlap. I think the biggest one, like the thing that I keep hearing over and over and over again, is around documentation. So I think like your organizational, you'll be successful in your organization if everybody in your organization knows what it is that you're doing and what you're offering. And I think we forget how much communication, not just through documentation, is required for people to know even what's available to them.
Yep. Love it. All right. And then this feels like a lob. I know you're going to crush this one. No pressure. One ritual to build a partnership with your customers, i.e. the product teams.
Yeah. I would say the best thing you can do to support your product teams, understand their outcomes and how your services help them reach their outcomes. And that's going to make some people like skin crawl a little bit, because now we're getting into like actual real humans outside the building customer outcomes. But I think platform teams have the ability to turn their colleagues, like help their colleagues be superheroes to your customers outside the building. And the more you understand that context and help them do that, they'll want to talk to you every day.
I love it. I love it. We have these guiding principles inside CircleCI, and one of them is think like the customer. And the way that we describe it is everyone ultimately serves CircleCI's customer. Some of us have internal customers to get us there, right? But to your point, I haven't really thought about it this way. If you understand your customer's path to the customer better, then you'll do a better job of helping them make that happen. I think I'm doing a crappy job of rephrasing what you said, but I love it. Okay, awesome. I'm going to take one audience question just because, I feel like I'm doing the audience a disservice if I don't take one of that. This is a little bit complicated, but let's try it. So let's say I don't know if this is platform engineer or product engineer because they gave me an abbreviation. You see product developers, I assume this is a platform engineer, operating your platform in an inefficient manner, but one that works for them in the short term. Ooh, the complexities of reality are seeping in here.
Yeah.
How do you balance the goal of enabling the teams with the goal of keeping them from misusing the platform? This is is it Hiram's law? Is that the one I'm thinking of? Like anything, any behavior that is available from the platform, like someone will take advantage of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I'm going to stop interjecting. How do you balance the goal of enabling the teams with the goal of keeping them from misusing the platform in a way that will be detrimental down the line?
Yeah.
There's some
Okay.
examples, but I'll leave it at that.
This is an onboarding question. So one of the things I wrote about in our API series is just how important onboarding is. If you can onboard a team to using your product or service, you have a customer for life. Like written code is lock-in. They're not going to revisit that code if they don't have to or they don't want to, right? So we want to remove as much friction as possible during that critical, I'm using your service for the first time. So I would say in some ways, let them make mistakes, but only to a point, because what was hard about this question is detrimental in the long run. How much harm is there? And this is where, like, as engineers, we have to be honest about, like, yes, there's the one perfect way to use it. And if you don't use it that way, there's harm. Is it really harm? How much harm right? So we got to pick our battles. And don't get me wrong, I am that person. I want everybody to follow every standard. Like when acts like a patch, I want to punch people in the face. Right? Like I am that person. I get that mindset. But we have to pick our battles. Like you have somebody who successfully used your product. Is this the moment where you say, hey, you're kind of doing it wrong? Or can that moment happen a little later?
Yeah.
That's the hard question.
Yep. Love it. All right. Awesome. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Teresa, thank you so much for joining. This has been fantastic. For anyone who didn't catch it, you should absolutely read the book, Continuous Discovery Happens. Particularly if you're here and you're trying to figure out how to think about product in order to deliver great platforms, then you will take a ton out of that book. Thanks again for joining.